Welcome everyone. Welcome to our expert witness panel, to our participants from Neighbourhood forums, to our assembly members, and to those of you who are watching on the webcast. This is the Planning Committee on the 25th of April 2019. And today our main subject is neighbourhood planning and London's communities. But before we go into that, I want to just hand over to Jonathan to go through the business, and then we'll introduce our participants. So
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public may like to follow the committee on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the discussion on social media using hashtag neighbourhood planning and hashtag assembly planning.
We'd like you to do that very much.
Could I please ask everyone to make sure your electric devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions? Move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence and Chair's announcements. And apologies have been received from Assembly Member Devenish. Moving to item number 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask members to note the list of offices held by Assembly members as set out in item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare?
Noted.
Number 3, which is minutes. Can I ask members to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of October 2018?
Agreed.
Moving on to agenda item number 4, which is the summary list of actions. Can I ask members to note the ongoing and completed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee?
Noted.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is examination in public, extending the provision of expert support. Can I ask the committee to agree in principle to additional expenditure of up to £6,650 on consultancy work by Joanna Chambers, MRTPI, to support the work of the Assembly during the examination in public?
So we agree that, do we?
Agreed.
And just so you know, members, that also includes writing up a report of the recommendations that the Assembly has made and how they've been taken up during the IP and what we'd still like taken up.
Can I also get the committee to recommend the proposed additional expenditure to the GLA Oversight Committee for formal approval?
Agreed.
And can also get the committee to note that the Executive Director of the Secretariat, in consultation with the Chair of the Planning Committee, will award the additional expenditure subject to the GLA Oversight Committee's approval.
Yeah.
And in accordance with section 2.2D of Standing Orders of the Greater London Authority, the Chair may take items of business in an order different from that set out in the agenda for the meeting. And we're going to move on to agenda's items 7, 8 and 9 prior to agenda item 6. So moving to agenda item 7, which is the Planning Committee Work Programme for 2018-19. Can members please note the summary of work completed during the 2018-19 Assembly year? Can also note the provisional schedule of meetings for the 2019-20 Assembly year, which is subject to agreement at the annual meeting of the London Assembly on the 2nd of May 2019.
Agreed.
And note the topic agreed by the GLA Oversight Committee on the 8th of April 2019 for the committee's meeting in June 2019. And can also delegate authority to the Chair in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree any further outputs relating to the committee's investigations in the 2018-19 Assembly year and arrangements for any site visits, informal meetings or engagement activities before the committee's next formal meeting.
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8, the date of the next meeting. Subject to confirmation of the London Assembly's calendar of meetings at the annual meeting of the London Assembly on the 2nd of May 2019, the next meeting of the Planning Committee is scheduled for Wednesday the 26th of June 2019 at 10 a.m. in Committee Room 5, City Hall. And agenda item number 9, which is any other business, and the Chair has no urgent business. And moving on to agenda item number 6.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, we can now get on to the meat of the meeting, which is to discuss, as I said, neighbourhood planning and London's communities. Now, the way the meeting's going to go is we're going to start with a sort of catch-up and ask some of our expert witnesses to tell us where we have got to with this. Then we're going to have presentations, and we're very pleased that the response has been so good from 6 representatives from neighbourhood forums from across London, and they're going to tell us about their neighbourhood plans and the process they're going through. And then after that, we're going to come back to our panel and have comments on what they've heard and go into some of the findings, the recommendations that we want to put forward, and we will be using all this material and evidence as part of a report. And it will be, is it for the second or the third report? Third report. It will be the third report we've written since neighbourhood planning was introduced in 2011 by the Localism Act. Now, our last report, so I'm going to first start, I'll ask the first few questions, and then we'll go forward with other members. The first part is really to find out where the state of play since we actually did our last report, which was in 2014. So it's really a sort of finding out how things have evolved since then. And what we found in 2014 was that at that stage, but remember, you know, it was only introduced in 2011 as a concept. So you're not looking at a very long time span. But the interest in neighbourhood planning, and you have to have a neighbourhood forum before that, so informing one and then having a neighbourhood plan, was limited in terms of the areas of London where it's been carried out. And 78 were in preparation at that time. And it would be good to know where we are now, which is 4 and a bit years on. No, 5 years on, actually. So could I ask Tony? Oh, I want to introduce you. Sorry, before I do that, please will you introduce yourselves to all of us and to particularly those who are watching on the webcast. Just say who you are and one line about your title.
So I'm Henry Peterson. I chair a neighbourhood forum in North Kensington, and I'm a co-convenor with Tony of the London Network.
So I'm Tony Burton. I'm the convener of neighbourhoodplanners.london. We're the volunteer-run informal network of neighbourhood planners throughout the capital.
On a voluntary basis?
Entirely voluntary basis, yeah.
I'm Emma Brunskill-Powell. I'm a researcher at Publica, and we are undertaking a study for Tony and Henry, looking at the potential for neighbourhood planning in areas experiencing quite high levels of socioeconomic deprivation.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'm Brian O'Donnell. I'm Strategic Planning Manager at London Borough of Camden, and I also chair the London Borough's Neighbourhood Plan Group.
I'm Sharon Hayward. I'm the Co-ordinator for London Tenants Federation. We've had bits and pieces of grant funding from around 2014 to work with groups of tenants and other community groups in trying to influence local planning, full stop. And some of those groups have or are in the process of developing neighbourhood plans.
Excellent. So you can see we've got a really good range of expert witnesses and experts to advise us. So back to where I was. Tony, if you could just start off, and then I'll move on to Emma, and just tell us where's it, just very briefly, where's it got to in terms of coverage? How many more plans are there in preparation? How many are adopted?
So there are now 12 made plans. You make a neighbourhood plan rather than adopt it. Where with a fair wind, we're hopeful that'll be 13 by the end of next month, with Harlesden having its referendum at the end of May. Important to recognise that only 3 made plans a couple of years ago. So in terms of people getting to the end of the process, that's accelerating. There's around 80 designated and active forums throughout London. There's more than 110 communities who have expressed an interest that we're aware of in neighbourhood planning, but not all of those have got to the stage of being formally recognised or even applying. A large number of those are at the sort of second stage of the neighbourhood plan, so they've been designated and they're drawing up a draft plan. One of the issues I'm sure we'll come back to is how we can accelerate that process, because rather a lot of them have been at that stage for rather too long. The process is slow but steady in London, perhaps at risk of stalling, as people don't get through the stages for reasons that we'll come back to, I'm sure. By comparison, there's over 700 neighbourhood plans which have been made throughout England. So that gives you a sense of the relative number, remembering that across much of the rest of England, the majority of those have been prepared by parish or town councils, which are pre-existing bodies. So In London, you have to establish a new organisation, a neighbourhood forum, and London is particularly complicated because of the nature of its demographics, the challenges of boundaries, the value of the land, and sometimes the attitude of local authorities and indeed the mayor. I think it's important to recognise that neighbourhood plans and neighbourhood forums exist in all sorts of different parts of London. So
that's going to be my next question. Whereabouts? What's the spread like now?
So a very widespread. If you look at the actual totality, so you've got as far north as Hadley Wood, as far west as Ickenham, as far south as Cheam in Sutton, as far east as North Woolwich, but a concentration in Camden and Westminster, who are far and away got more forums and more activity going on in them than anywhere else. But all sorts of different places have had neighbourhood forums set up and are producing plans, and as I'm sure Emma will expand. We're seeing them in areas which are relatively prosperous, areas which aren't prosperous. So it's clear that the approach is flexible enough and adaptable enough to the variety of circumstances that exist across London. The question is, why is it happening, where it's happening? And I think that's a question which will tease us for some time as to explaining the geography of what's happening where.
Why? Just that's interesting that because our perception was that there weren't many in outer London, and there are, from what you're saying. Or
I'm saying that they exist in outer London. I'm not the majority. Are in certainly central London, however you want to design that, within sort of zone 1 and 2. But they exist literally in the far north and the far west, almost as far south as you can go. The east is quite interesting in that there's very little neighbourhood planning in any of the boroughs. Basically, in the east and about almost 180 degrees of London. So the outer London boroughs to the east are neighbourhood planning deserts in terms of the existence of designated forums.
Would it be helpful? Could you just name the boroughs where there's no neighbourhood planning?
Yeah, so there are 9, Barking and Dagenham, Bromley, Croydon, Harrow, Havering, Merton, Newham, Redbridge and the City of London. So that's basically everything in the east, Merton, City of London in the centre and Harrow in the northwest.
If I could just sort of postscript that by saying Newham does have
Carpenters.
but that's it comes under LLDC rather than Newham, so the actual borough. And when in terms of measuring these, we looked at those which don't have any designated neighbourhood forums rather than just full-on activity from the very earliest stages, because that was just proving to be very, very difficult to measure.
So we're hopeful that at least 2 of those will see something coming forward within the next sort of 12 months, but others it seems pretty dead in terms of the level of activity.
Before I just move on to ask Emma a bit about her findings, could you, I just wondered whether you might just, well no, maybe we will go on to Emma at this stage. Your findings, Emma, because you've just done some research on this, haven't you? Are you finding...
Oh, sorry. So what we found is that there, as Tony said, the spread is quite wide. There are some real challenges in terms of things like funding, in terms of the skills that are available in neighbourhoods. As Tony mentioned, what we're looking at is this double challenge of being both an urban neighbourhood forum, which throws up a much more complex process than doing it in a rural village, plus looking at areas which have high levels of deprivation. So the assumption that there'll be planners and architects and people who can produce websites in the area who have time and skills to offer on a voluntary basis, that's not always possible. So there's the challenges in terms of skills, the challenges in terms of funding, and there's challenges in terms of this non-parish status, which means it adds, in some cases that I've been looking at as part of this study, it's taken 2 years just to get the area designated. So that adds an extreme sort of there's a lot more potential for it to slow down and for it to stall in the process. But there are a lot of opportunities, and people who get into neighbourhood planning who are motivated to start a neighbourhood plan, it's very much about the social aspects of it, and a lot of people go into it with this idea of making things better for their community, which is really how neighbourhood planning should be. It should be this positive thing. It should be about making things better and improving. So that's something that we find a lot in London. You know, I think there's a reputation for neighbourhood planning being quite a NIMBY exercise, but what I've found in my work, and I'm sure Tony and Henry will agree in terms of the people that they've worked with, it's not usually a single issue avoiding an estate being demolished, for example. It's about people saying, here's what we would like to see. So that's a really big part of it. There are a couple of other sort of big opportunities. So it's a really good chance for communities to create a relationship with the local authority that's not antagonistic necessarily, that can be this working relationship where they can give information about their local area, which can be very, very detailed and would be incredibly useful to a local authority. They can share that information, and the local authority also has links to a community, which can, you know, be a sort of conduit in some senses. So there's a tension between the challenges and the opportunities, but I think overall what we found is it's something that's got a lot of scope if it's properly resourced and if it's well supported for the communities, at least that we've spoken to.
That's good, thank you. I just think, Tony, it might be helpful if you just took us through the stages you have to go through in order to get to a point when a plan is made, as you say.
Okay, so first thing is your local authority does need to agree both the existence of a neighbourhood forum and the boundary. So those are often submissions that go in, applications that go in simultaneously, although they don't have to.
Can I just, sorry, is there a sort of template structure for a neighbourhood forum, or does it vary from borough to borough? In terms of how it has to be constituted?
There's a set of legal minimum requirements. That's what should be being set by the boroughs. A number of boroughs are asking a whole range of superfluous and additional questions, which is one of the issues about creating unnecessary obstacles to get to the process. But the legislation sets out quite clearly what the minimum requirements are. And there's guidance there about what sensible sort of guidelines about how you might think about a boundary. About the sort of size, although that can be quite variable. And there are minimum requirements about the sort of responsibilities of the forum in terms of its sort of purpose and its constitution. It has to be open to anyone, and ward councillors sort of have to be invited if they want to be on it. So there are some minimum standards that are set there. Once that process, so that's a local authority process. Once an application goes in, that has to be advertised. And there's a sort of time limit now within which a decision is meant to be made, although a number of local authorities have found sort of loopholes which have rather delayed that process longer than they should have done. Once you're designated as a forum and as an area, it's in your hands as that forum to then move the process forward at the speed that you wish. So it's entirely in your gift what you do. You need to produce a draft plan, which you need to consult on, minimum of 6 weeks, and there's a set of formal sort of consultees who need to be involved in that, but it's a wider public debate. Once you've done that, then you need to finalise your plan and submit it to the local authority. Alongside the plan, you need to provide a statement that you've met the basic conditions that the law requires you to meet, which we can expand on if helpful. And a consultation statement which shows that this is drawn out of an effective process of community engagement. The local authority then consults on the plan. It then goes to an examiner, an independent examiner, who is appointed by the local authority but with the agreement of the neighbourhood forum. And they have the plan, and they also have all the feedback on the local authority's consultation. They issue a report with recommendations. It's then for the local authority to decide what to take on board by way of recommendations. Most times people just take on board the recommendations and move on to the final stage, which is a referendum, which is the responsibility of the local authority. It gets funding for this from central government to do it, and a simple majority at that referendum means the plan is made.
It's quite an arduous process then.
So it's
not faint-hearted.
So but it's a serious process. Yeah. So there's I suppose it's a balance here between, you can make this process as simple as you want it to be. You could have a plan with like 2 or 3 policies in it, which are really important to your area, and you could do it quickly. But obviously then it would only be dealing with a small number of issues, or you could try and be like almost a shadow authority and try and cover all the bases. You can push the boundaries of what you can achieve with planning, or you can play safe. The more you push the boundaries, the more evidence you need to justify, what you're doing. So these are all choices that neighbourhood forums have got. They will need help and support to be able to make those choices in an informed way as possible, and they really benefit from talking to people who've been down the route ahead of them, so they know where it's worth making the effort and where it isn't. It's really important, I think, in all these situations to be working out where they can add value, because there's no point in a neighbourhood plan simply repeating what's already available in planning policy through the local authority or through indeed the London plan or national planning policy. But there are choices there. So there is a requirement for process, but it's a judgment as to how much time and effort you want to put into it.
That's really, really helpful. And the only last bit before we bring in all our participants so they can tell us about their experiences is what about the funding and the technical support, just so we have a picture of that?
Chair, can I also add?
Yes.
Is this process, how is it communicated within the borough? How do people know that you can actually set up a forum and that this is the process? And part of that would also be funding and capacity building.
Both those issues are sometimes linked, because getting the funding to promote and the concept and the idea of neighbourhood planning is part of the issue. So at the moment, there is no mechanism to promote neighbourhood planning. It is entirely down to the goodwill or the intent of local councillors, local authorities, local community groups, pre-existing networks. And one of the issues that we found as neighbourhoodplanners.london is there's no real appetite to be promoting in a positive way neighbourhood planning through boroughs and through councillor networks. There are of course exceptions, and there are as always, but generally you have to work quite hard to find out what's going on and what the process is, and you need really to find someone who's going to be a bit more friendly than your local authority will be when you sort of ring them up and ask them about what neighbourhood planning is. Lots of boroughs have virtually nothing, and some have nothing on their websites, as one example. In terms of the funding and support that's available, there's currently a 4-year programme. We're just into the 2nd year. It's a second round of funding from central government, £24.5 million over 4 years to support neighbourhood planning across the country. No, England as a whole. So London will get whatever share it gets, but on the basis of what it asks for. That's available in grant. So the grants of up to £9,000, which are available to any neighbourhood forum that wishes to undertake a neighbourhood plan. And then there is additional funding, another sort of £8,000 if you meet certain criteria. Those criteria have been tightened up. So previously, all neighbourhood forums were eligible to get that additional funding, and that isn't now the case, and that's a major problem in London. So there's been a backward step in the new funding regime for London, and that's one of the reasons we believe that a lot of neighbourhood forums are stalled at this sort of stage, because they were promised more money than they've now got access to. There is additionally technical support, which is provided by a single consultancy, AECOM, around a set of pre-agreed packages of support on issues that, as it were, have already been defined for you. So if what you're interested in fits into one of those packages, then okay, you get some support. The feedback on the quality of support is quite variable. And the government has chosen not to, for example, fund character studies about why areas are different to other areas, whereas it did have that kind of funding, that kind of technical support under the previous programme, and that was very popular. So to some extent, some extent, what you can get funding for and what you can get technical support for is dictated by government policy, and that's become tighter and more directional under the new support programme than it was under the previous support programme.
Are there any other innovative sources of funding?
So there are other sources of funding which are used variably by neighbourhood forums. So occasionally some will find ward budgets where their councils to operate that mechanism. So they'll find they're able to access funding through their ward councillors. Technically, community infrastructure levy you could use to support neighbourhood planning, but we're not aware of authorities sort of taking that opportunity. There are other options through the lottery. So some have used Awards for All under what's now the National Lottery Community Fund to support neighbourhood planning. And there are a range of sort of other community sort of funding mechanisms, but everyone wants them, so there's heavy demand. Some bodies, particularly where they've got significant businesses in their area or they're working collaboratively with business, so in a number of places these are jointly prepared with local businesses, they've been able to access support through those local businesses, either by literally rattling the tin and asking for cheques, or lots of in-kind support, meeting rooms, photocopying, printing, all that kind of thing. So there are those sorts of sources available. But it's sort of down to the innovation and agility of local volunteers to try and find that. And I guess we would call ourselves, we're a support mechanism, we're a bunch of volunteers. Hopefully we do something useful, people seem to keep coming back to our events. But you know, we're just an idea which sort of has floated in London. We're unique, there isn't an equivalent to us anywhere else in the country, but we're doing this for the love of it.
Impressive. Emma, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of more sources of funding or?
Yeah, we've seen a couple of the 7 case studies that I looked at as part of this study. We've seen a couple of them taking, trying to find support, whether that's in-kind support in terms of studies or, as Tony mentioned, printing and simply having a roof over your head. So Stratford and West Ham did a really interesting piece of work in terms of setting the boundaries, where they used School 21, which is a high school in Stratford, in order to try and get the resource in this case was just people. So because they were using local children or high school students, they then had access to their parents, and their parents became interested in it, and their parents could feed in their insights into where the boundaries were. So that it tends to come from within, these kind of innovations, but they are out there and people are learning from them, for example, through Neighbourhood Planners London events. Queen's Park is something of an anomaly because it's the only urban parish council, but they fund their neighbourhood forum through the money that they have as a parish council, but they also received a GLA grant, for example, for part of their engagement process. Somerstown is another interesting example because they are surrounded by the Knowledge Quarter, and they have this all these historic housing estates. And when I spoke to the chair of the Neighbourhood Forum, what she was saying was that sometimes we can feel like a goldfish bowl with students from the Bartlett coming in all the time to look at these historic housing estates. And so she decided to turn that on its head and use the fact that people were interested in studying Somerstown to get UCL and the Bartlett School to spend a bit of time doing work that would serve the Neighbourhood Forum, so sort of boosting their evidence base.
That's interesting.
I used to live in Somerstown, so.
If it's okay with you members, I think it would be good now to hear from our 6 forum participants. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first we're going to hear from Roger Winfield, who's from Kentish Town Forum. Maybe Forum. Going to come up and talk to us.
Yes.
Thank you. So now what you need to know is that I've given a set of issues and areas that we'd like covered, and everyone's going to endeavour to do that in 5 minutes.
Okay, so the clock
We
running
really would
now.
like you to stick to 5 minutes. We really want to. And Jonathan here is going to do the timing. So he will tell you when we're getting to. You've got 1 minute to go. Is that all right?
Thank you for inviting me this afternoon. My name is Roger Winfield and I chair the Kentish Town Neighbourhood Forum. And as the chair has indicated, this presentation is limited to dealing with the questions which the committee has asked me to answer. For those of you who don't know it, Kentish Town is a diverse inner city neighbourhood within the London Borough of Camden, containing a mix of housing, council, housing association, social, owned and privately rented. Its main centres are the High Street, Kentish Town Road, and the so-called industry sites at Regis Road and the Murphy site. Turning now to the Kentish Town Neighbourhood Plan, it was made or adopted, you've heard that discussion already, by Camden Council in September 2016, following a rather more successful 91% yes vote than that other referendum in June 2016. The whole process started with public meetings in 2012. Currently, 14 people, of whom 6 are women, are active in the forum. Engagement with the community has been through public meetings, workshops, street displays, door knocking, social media, website and local groups. Let me give you a couple of examples of the benefits of the process as I have seen them. It gives us a deeper understanding of the area and the community. And secondly, the forum is playing a major part in helping to shape the Kentish town of the future. But there have been challenges. One has been to reach all parts of the community, and for a group of volunteers to run an unfunded statutory body and manage the large volume of work is a major challenge. You have also asked specifically about Camden Council and locality. The former, Camden Council, continues to be very helpful. Locality assisted in the preparation of the draft plan, but there's been no involvement since. Various other...
Just explain, locality are, sorry to interrupt, but locality are funded by the government?
I think they are...
Is that right?
They manage the grant programme
yeah.
on behalf of the government.
That's right. Various other external organisations and individuals helped in the plan's preparation. And since then, external groups and individuals are represented in some of the Neighbourhood Forum working groups, and we contribute ourselves to other groups. You ask if the process of making the plan could have been made quicker. I doubt it personally, this is a personal view, without limiting the community involvement in the process.
That's interesting.
As to the future, the plan, this document, identifies 26 separate policies. And these include, just to give you a taster, step-free access at the underground and overground stations and the protection of public houses. But the major policy is the potential development of the 14.3 hectares, 35.3 acres, of the Regis Road and Murphy sites, on which I will elaborate. The main point we picked up from our community consultation was that the two sites are under-occupied in terms of capacity and density. The opportunity these sites...
This is an industrial site, isn't it? Regis Road. Is it strategic industrial site?
Yes.
Or locally designated?
Locally designated.
Locally.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. The opportunity these sites offer is to re-provide existing employment space with buildings that suit the new economy. The minimum is to retain current employment floor space, but our hope is to increase this space and to increase employment numbers with greater density buildings. The reprovision of the employment space creates the land for housing in Kentish Town where no other opportunity exists. Bringing new employment jobs into Kentish Town will have another benefit of bringing money into local shops and our high street. So why preserve poor density and capacity in central areas? Redevelopment should be allowed, we argue, that preserves or increases new employment space that then leads to the freeing up of land for residential use, especially if this can be done with 50% affordable housing for local people. Finally, the Kentish Town plan policy for Regis Road and the Murphy site is now incorporated in Camden Council's draft planning framework for Kentish Town, on which there has been and continues to be extensive consultation. Thank you for listening to me.
That's very good, excellent. And you've done it in 5 minutes. Very, very good. And the last bit, so that's quite a win, isn't it?
It is quite a win.
It's quite a win that you've got that. Now, just so members know, this is the only example of a plan that's made. You know, it's already. But what we're hearing is how it continues into the future. And it'd be good if later Brian O'Donnell, who must have been very involved in it, could tell us what Camden think about the whole sort of intensification, really, of the local sill and the housing too. So thank you very much.
I printed out some expanded notes for the committee and for the panel, if you would like me to hand them out at some stage.
That's very good. Thank you. It sounds like you feel. I get the feeling you think we've limited you rather. You know.
Well, I've tried to stick within the 5 minutes.
Well, you've done brilliantly.
Yes, well, thank you very much.
You've done brilliant. But it's just that we want to hear from all of you. You
Yes,
see.
sure, of course. Thank you.
But maybe, by the way, I do want you, when we get to recommendations and so on, I do want you to pipe up from the side, like a Greek chorus. You know. Anyway, so now we're going to hear from Harlesden Neighbourhood Forum, Leo Netta.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'll reply to the questions that I received, but before going anywhere, let's just say that I found the experience a very demanding experience. I don't think a community could deliver a planning document without great support. That's what I would like to encourage the committee to do, to support the communities that intend to engage with this process. So House Neighbourhood Plan area largely sits within the London Borough of Brent, south of the borough, although a small part of the south to the south is the responsibility of the OPDC, the Old Oak Park Royal Corporation. There are two wards within the area, Housden and Kensal Green. Housden has a vibrant town centre with a wide variety of independent shops. The high street is very vibrant, catering for its ethnically diverse population. The buildings are mostly Victorian architecture. There are few pocket parks and a big, beautiful park. It's a very densely developed area whose population increased substantially by about 50% between 2001 and 2011, reaching to 18,000 people. So as you can imagine, there is huge pressure on resources, especially housing and land. Can anything good come from housing? Well, deprivation leads to considerable social ills. But that contrasts with a strong sense of belonging and community links. Churches are abundant, and there are 2 Islamic community centers, but street tension gives the area a rough edge. In planning terms, Housden has experienced a long period of decline. More recently, there is a kind of a whiff of gentrification. The housing stock is generally good, and the town centre has been improved with the implementation of a new road scheme, including a shared surface for part of the high street. But there is potential for further improvement in the town centre based on housing rich heritage of in the arts, music, etc., and as a shopping destination. Housing could benefit from the regeneration at Old Oak. The neighbourhood plan wants to promote the type of development that will meet the needs of the population there. That includes housing, community facilities, business space, green spaces, retail and leisure. Neighbourhood Forum builds on a history of strong community action. The forum was supported by LIFT, a community organization, a local organization that merged with Crisis. So now Crisis Skylight branch helps by running what we call the secretariat, the support for the forum. The Methodist Church, where I am the minister, has been supporting the forum too. So the planning document is ready after a long time. It has been externally examined and is going to be submitted to referendum on the 30th of May. The Neighbourhood Forum's predecessor was the Town Centre team. The Town Centre team, managed to get the changes to the road scheme before it folded up because of political difficulties. The energy from that experience was harnessed by a new leadership, and the Neighbourhood Forum was created 4 or 5 years ago. The membership stands at 125 now. There is a good gender balance, although the ethnic mix could be better, though I'm a Brazilian, as you have noticed by my footballing skills. There are a good number of volunteers that help run the events. There has been engagement with schools and an art design competition for banners leading from Wilson Junction station to the town centre. And we have engaged the community in many ways. Perhaps adding to the previous speaker, say that in our case we involved community groups such environmental community group there, church together, and also through the social media.
You've got 1 minute.
Yeah, he's getting fidgety. I think the values coming out of the experience we had is that community participation really, collaboration among the different agencies in the area, and a framing process for the community. And I think what we achieved above all was to put house on the map for the council and the OPDC. So I'll jump here. So we are supporting the setting up of a community housing led project that we hope that it will be what the forum becomes after the referendum, community led housing project. Just to say, behind the housing plan there is a great spirit of community cooperation and cohesion, and a realization that the environment in which we live can influence and change the way that we live our lives. Thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you very much. Did we limit you too much?
That's okay. So I can answer questions. Do you have questions?
Okay, Janice Murray from, is it the Greater Carpenters Estate or Carpenters?
It's the Greater Carpenters Neighbourhood Forum.
Neighbourhood Forum. Yes, of course, it's much bigger than the Carpenters Estate.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does include some areas around it. Alright, so I'm Janice Murray. I'm Joint Secretary of the Carpenters Neighbourhood Forum. And I'll I'll just get started. Tell me if I go over.
I will.
Okay. All right. So our area, the Greater Carpenters Neighbourhood area, is on the border of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and Stratford, but it is physically separated from it by railway lines. It's smaller than a ward with around 2,500 homes, low-rise and high-rise. Some of Carpenter's estate particularly has been there from the late 60s, and the other surrounding areas are new and some are brand new. Yeah? It's a mixed type of homes and tenures, with freeholders, leaseholders, social and private renters. We are very near to Stratford Station, with an ever-growing number of new private and student homes being built on the edges of our area, bringing with them quite a high level of transients, short-term private renting and some Airbnb. We have a wealth of community assets, green and play spaces, a primary school, a buildings crafts college, an active community centre, public houses, a couple of local shops, and a doctor's surgery. Our forum has been successful in gaining a listing of 5 assets of community value in its neighbourhood area. These are a range of existing businesses here, including construction, maintenance, refurbishment, artist studios. There are also training facilities in the Building Crafts College and the Carpenters and Docklands Centre. So one of your questions was what stage we're at now. So we've carried out consultation on our pre-submission neighbourhood plan, submitted our consultation statement, and we're not far off submitting our plan ready for an examination. Okay, but we didn't start off looking to develop a neighbourhood plan. Our origins were with the residents of my estate, Carpenters. We campaigned against Newham Council's plan to demolish our estate and redevelop to redevelop with UCL, a new campus, and later up to 4 times the number of houses that we have now. So we set up our own action group at that stage to try and stop that happening. As social housing tenants, we first made contact with Sharon from the London Tenants Federation and then with Richard from Just Space to help us look at alternatives to the demolition of our homes. With some funding from Loretta Lees, a King's College academic, Sharon and Richard helped us to develop a bottom-up community plan that we might use to negotiate with the London Legacy Dockland Corporation, who have become our local planning authority. Even at this stage, we held meetings, walkabouts, organised consultations, and eventually carried out a door-to-door survey, which was completed by more than half the residents on the estate to make sure we had something that the majority would support. We've engaged in trying to influence the LLDC's local plan, and the LLDC told us that if we wanted to have that kind of detailed influence, we would need to develop a neighbourhood plan. So we carried on from there. At this stage, we have 15 core members, with around a third being women. Okay, but our neighbourhood forum have over 170 members from the community, including the odd councillor. We used to have a London Assembly member as well. Over the years, including the early work in developing the community plan, a huge amount of meetings, exhibitions, door knocking, surveys, community events, and between putting together letters, notices and newsletters. Okay. None of this has been easy, as our key motivation has been saving our homes on the Carpenter's estate so that they might not be refurbished, rather than demolished, so that we can keep together our community. But that's not what Newham Council wants. In fact, we've had problems engaging with Newham Council all the way through. Even the new mayor now, Roxana, we still haven't managed to engage with her. I don't know if any of you can help us with that. Please let me know later.
We're coming to the end of the 5 minutes.
Oops, okay.
Just
I'll try
knock
to make
out
it
those
quick.
points.
Right, okay. So,
We'll
we've
talk
had
to
to
Roxana.
focus on... Huh?
We'll say something to Roxana.
Yeah. We've had to focus hard on putting together something that our community wants in terms of additional homes and jobs, green and community infrastructure, as well as trying to convince people that it is worth doing when it is clear that they have no sympathy for the residents of Carpenter's Estate and the new Neighbourhood Forum. But we've had a lot of support, not just from residents, but from other tenant community sector groups, students, academics, Max Fordham, locality, and through locality, also ACOM, Just Space, the London Tenants Federation, and people from the local church and our community centre. Some funding came from the Loretta Lees, some through London's Tenants Federations, grants from Trust from London, UCL's Engineering Exchange, as well as locality. I don't think we would have got this far without the extra support and funding, in addition to the locality funding. The LLDC planning officers have been very helpful throughout the process, while Newham Council, as I said, is quite the opposite. Incredibly, we are among the good case studies in the London's Mayor's Good Practice Guide to Estate Regeneration, but Newham continues to operate as if we don't exist, as if they don't need to acknowledge us at all. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have to stop you.
That's all right. So I brought some of our work, starting where we started from with a community plan up to our draft neighbourhood plan now.
Excellent, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that. Now we're going to Lewisham and Steve Kenny, Grove Park.
Hello, thank you everybody for the invite. So, yes, Grove Park. It's in Lewisham, but it's at the tail end of Lewisham, I think you know. Verging on the borders of Bromley, so it's Zone 4. It stretches over 3 wards. You've got Grove Park, Downham, and Whitefoot, which are some super output wards and high levels. I think probably the most, one of the biggest regions of high levels of deprivation in England. The area has had, well, no investment for 30 years, which is why we started the neighbourhood plan. But we had all the cuts and we have no public assets. It's roughly 20,000 plus residents, and in the existing local Lewisham plan, it's described as an area of managed decline, managed change. We refer to it as managed decline. And we started the forum process in 2011 when we approached Lewisham Council to be a front runner, because we were invited to. Lewisham Council at the time said no, which meant that we didn't have access to £50,000. So instead you get access to £9,000, and that's a big difference in doing neighbourhood planning.
We haven't heard about that, have we? 50,000 for front runners.
There was a very small number, about a dozen, I think, front runners even before the legislation was introduced to try the idea out, who got an extra batch of money. So Hackbridge is one, which has just succeeded in getting its plan made. But after that experiment, we were into the support programme that we've discussed.
Right, thanks.
Yeah, so it was a bit, as you can imagine.
We'll add that to your 5 minutes.
That was, and that got rejected twice, not because that went through 2 rounds. Why we started it, apart from the lack of investment, was we had a local pub which was designated to be demolished called the Berryhill Hotel, which last year was listed Grade 2 as one of the second most important pubs in England and is now reopened, and thanks to Richard and Just Space we gave evidence upstairs to amend the London plan to protect pubs across London. But that starts back in 2009. But it still remains under threat despite its listing because it's not about change of use. Has Lewisham been helpful? Well, they took a year to respond to the pre-submission draft, so that's not very helpful. They also removed half the ACV from the pub, and we had to fight for that, so hence why it's taken so long to get to this point, because if we're always fighting for our assets. For example, we've had to fight for Grove Park Youth Club, which is cited for demolition for housing, despite the fact we have all the issues regarding youth. It turns out it is probably the last remaining piece of social architecture from the British modernist movement, and we hope to have it reopened in October this year, and that's again working with UCL and Just Space. So we're eternally grateful to them. In terms of sufficient funds, if you think of 50,000 beginning to 9,000 now, and a local plan probably costs 100 to 200,000 maybe, how is that actually possible? In terms of locality, at the beginning you had 3 choices. You had the Princess Foundation, you had locality, and you had Planning Aid. That got distilled to 1 group and 1 technical support package of AECOM. In terms of technical support, it's very nice on paper. However, we shouldn't have to be chasing the consultants to finish the projects. And some of those have taken 7-8 months to get through. So it's been incredibly frustrating. In terms of how a process could be made quicker, well, council's responding quickly instead of a year. Public bodies like TfL, Network Rail, responding in a timely manner, because in our plan we actually have 11 sites for development, so it's not about just saving stuff, we actually are very proactive. And with that in mind, as we were getting no funding for our development process, we applied for the GLA's Good Growth Fund, round 1, November 2017, and we were awarded some funding, and it was very positive. However, the end result, we asked for strategic master planning, and what we got was micro-interventions. And any community can do micro-interventions. What we need is strategic master planning for super output areas.
So you got the money?
Well, the GLA got the money because it was handed to them. They changed the brief and distilled it so far backwards that at one point I was considering whether to actually just abandon the whole project.
Because it's something to feedback then.
Yeah, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Because nothing changes. This is the problem. In terms of major projects for us, we obviously have a large housing development and an urban national park, which is a 35-acre stretch of green space. Some of it's under threat, but most of it isn't, and it's about connecting that and then going back to the GLA and saying we want this designated as a metropolitan sink as opposed to a bunch of local borough sinks, which I think in terms of strategic thinking is far more important for access to nature. And we've kind of modelled it on the national park system, which was about access to nature in 1920, and we in London are limited to nature, and we've got masses of high-rise buildings. We need those green spaces, and I think that's me.
That's great, thank you. Very good, thank you, sir. Now,
I have one recommendation.
Yes.
That the GLA and us work together to work with the NBPF, because unless we have strong planning policies in place, most of this is kind of, we shouldn't have to be sitting here. I mean, that is your job as experts. Local neighbourhood plans, if the planning policy was strong enough and robust enough, we shouldn't be having to do this as volunteers.
So you mean you wouldn't need, something we'll take up afterwards. You mean you wouldn't need neighbourhood planning?
I don't think so, if the planning system was working properly.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, now we're having, I'm going to hear from another neighbourhood forum in Lewisham, Andrea Carey
Fuller
from Deptford.
Hi. Hi, thank you. I'm here to represent Deptford Neighbourhood Action, DNA. The name was actually created by another Andrea, who was our chair, Andrea Hughes, because she wanted Deptford to be in the local people's DNA in terms of that sense of ownership and collaboration. We started in 2015, started talking about setting up a neighbourhood forum because we wanted to make a positive difference. We wanted local people in the community to feel that they had a real say in what was happening around planning in that part of Lewisham, because Deptford has historically always had this feeling, and still has this feeling, that people in Deptford feel that they're dumped upon, that they don't ever have a say, and when they try and have a say, their views are ignored. And that's the sort of where we started from. So we've got various objectives that are part of DNA, encouraging community engagement, community cohesion, active citizenship, improving the health of the local community, supporting local businesses, organisations, industries and market traders, because we've got a thriving traditional market which urgently needs support, otherwise it's going to die. Promoting and developing places for creative communities to flourish, promoting the Healthy Streets agenda in terms of we wanted it to be more accessible, and especially as we border the river, there's a small bit of river and half of that river area is taken up by Convoy's Wharf, which is going to be the largest development in Deptford. 3,500 homes, 15% so-called affordable, but we know affordable doesn't mean affordable in the sense that we want it to be affordable, i.e. the provision of quality social and affordable housing for people on low to middle incomes. We know it's going to end up being mainly shared ownership, which isn't affordable. And to protect and promote all forms of Deptford heritage and identities. Deptford is a fantastic, vibrant place. It's got a wonderful heritage. It's the first royal dockyard, Convoy's Wharf, which is why I'm kind of going to go around a bit, but why we applied to locality to get a particular technical package called design codes, so that we could try and get some kind of Deptford identity into this huge site, which probably takes up about 1/6 of our neighbourhood plan area. Otherwise, it will end up being a sort of an enclave that will be just all about society enrichment, and it won't have any links to the existing estates and communities around it. And that's one of the reasons we've got the design code package, and we've had some fantastic collaboration from local artists and local people that are interested in finding a way to weave in Deptford identity and heritage into Convoy's Wharf. There are 10 of us on the steering group. I'm pleased to say the majority are women, actually. We have 7 women and 3 men. We've got people from different cultural backgrounds. UCL have engaged with us and done 2 studies in parts of Deptford, not the whole of our neighbourhood planning area. We sort of go from the Southwark border down to New Cross Station and along Deptford Broadway. So we take in the whole of Evelyn Ward, which is one of the most deprived wards in the country, a bit of New Cross Ward and a tiny, tiny bit of Brockley Ward. UCL, Urban Design and Planning Design have sort of done lots of individual reports, and these are all on display in the Peaks Resource Centre, which is the facility that we've managed to use to have a permanent display at, because one of the frustrations has been that we keep asking for a meanwhile use of one of the empty shops or offices in the high street, of which there are about 15. so that we could just engage with people who are shopping and things like that, because a lot of our people are, come from poorer backgrounds, are living hand to mouth, are working, are too busy to engage on the neighbourhood forum on a regular basis, even though we go out to local assemblies, local community groups on estates and things like that. We think our policies, we're at the stage where we're almost going to be launching our pre-submission plan, which is Regulation 14. So we've got a draft neighbourhood plan at the moment, which we're sort of trying to finalise before we go out to effective consultation on it. It's going to be about 75 pages, because Deptford is a very complex area. There's lots of heritage and character, as I've said. We had another package from locality, which is a heritage and character assessment, which has been fantastic. And that does highlight the need to protect and preserve things like sightlines, for example, from Deptford High Street that goes right up to Convoy's Wharf. And then, unfortunately, Plot 8, one of the first development sites that's been put forward by Hutchinson Wompar, is going to effectively block the sightline for local people to the river. There's lots of issues like that. I know. We're going to have probably about 25 different policies, and we've been engaged with Just Space. We love the community-led plan for London. If you've looked at the Rainsford review of planning, you know that the planning system is currently broken. There isn't truly effective community engagement. Lewisham planning officers, we tried to work with them on a pilot at the start of our process to redesign the Tide Mill garden site, which, as you may have heard about, because it's had a lot of national publicity, and it would have been possible to have built around the wildlife garden, which the GLA, by the way, cited in their Greener City Fund as a place for children to play in nature, and got funding under the Greener City Fund for that reason. And it would have been good to do that, but unfortunately that didn't happen. And there's lots of areas like that that really need, and neighbourhood forums are the only way of proper direct democracy in terms of planning. There is no other form of direct democracy apart from neighbourhood planning.
That's a great moment to end.
Okay, there's lots more to say.
I know, I can tell.
Okay.
You can always, it would be very good to have it, if you've written it down, the lots more.
I will. I'll produce something and I'll send it to you with lots of information
and
evidence.
The idea is to use these as case studies in our report.
I know.
So
Okay.
we want to do justice to all of you. All right, and finally, we're going to Tooting in Wandsworth. We're going to, it's called Beck and Balham, is it?
Tooting Beck and Broadway.
Tooting Beck. What's your neighbourhood forum called?
It's called Tooting Beck and Broadway Neighbourhood Forum.
Oh, Tooting Beck and
Broadway. As it does on what it does on the tin. So thank you very much, Nikki.
It's Jane Brigginshaw.
Yeah, my name's Jane Brigginshaw, thank you. And thanks a lot for inviting me here. So we are in Wandsworth. This is the area that we're talking about. We take in 2 council wards, Tooting and Graveney wards, and then we touch on 3 others. We're probably about 1 kilometre from top to bottom. And we span 2 tube stations, Tooting Beck and Tooting Broadway. We've got 4 to 5 retail hubs, with the biggest one being Tooting Broadway. And we have a large area. We've got 30,000 people that we're representing. And we do that because that is a sort of cohesive place. And that's why we chose that. We consulted a lot, and that's what we came back with. In terms of housing tenure, the top group is private rented. We have a lot of private rented accommodation, 37%, which is well above the Wandsworth average. And then we have mortgaged, owned outright. And then we have a small amount of council social rented, which is well below the Wandsworth average. But that, I don't think that really means that we don't have a need for social housing. We just don't have any. We have a very densely populated area, and there's a growing population of children. Many of our schools have the majority of BME pupils, above average special educational needs. the forum was designated in April 2017, but we started the process, like many of the colleagues here, in 2015, and it was bringing together active community groups. So it was from the start a type of network of networks. And we started off because we wanted to see what change would be, what needed to be in Tooting, what good change would be in Tooting. And it really was a grouping of grassroots organisations. We didn't have help. We really had little outside help. Absolutely no involvement from the local authority, and that's continued from 2015 to date. We bring together businesses, so it's not the same. It's not sort of same old. It's businesses. It's really diverse. It's businesses, food kitchens. There's a history group, Summertown 182, who tells the story of the place through the 182 people who died in the First World War. So there's a real diversity of type of groups. There's the Balham Tooting Community Association, which was set up in the wake of the 7/7 bombings. So there's a lot of really established and rooted community organisations, retailers, Rotary groups, schools, local councillors, MP, you name it. And faiths flourish in Tooting. We have 40% Christian, but we also have 20% Muslim, 8% Hindu, 23% no faith. So, you know, it's the diverse London that we recognise. And we came together, and we still come together a lot as a community. We eat together a lot. Tooting's very well known for its restaurants. I think there's a curry club which has 500 members. It took 3 years to visit all the restaurants, so there's a lot. And so people are absolutely the core of the vision for Tooting. And although we have very many people who are very well qualified in the built environment, for us it's no place without people, and we wanted to build a massive legitimacy. So we did that. We asked 4 questions over 4 years in very many different ways, in very many different places, at community events, schools, businesses, you name it, online. We got over 1,500 individual comments on these questions we asked. And the questions we asked, what do you love about Tooting? Overwhelmingly, can anyone hazard the guess what came back? Anyone hazard the guess?
Curry.
Pardon?
Curry.
Curry, no, you're wrong. That came number 2. Diversity, of course, diversity. People came back with diversity, community, and indeed restaurants, and indeed curry, yeah. What do we need? We need more amenity space, more culture, more green space, more affordable housing. It's a densely populated area, as I said. You can see from this, it's bounded by green spaces, but the mass is dense. So what people wanted, what they wanted to change was the litter, the traffic, the walkability, the air quality, the affordable housing. They wanted more affordable housing, and they wanted to change the character of it, what little we have. So in a funny sort of way, Tooting is flourishing in spite of our environment, and we absolutely have no problem coming together as a community. This is just a snapshot of one of our chairs. We have a number of chairs. We called a meeting, this is BATCA, we called a meeting at 12 hours in response to the New Zealand atrocities, and we had a huge visual at 12 hours notice. So we come together a lot as a community. We don't really have a problem with that. But in a funny sort of way, I think that the process type of narrows us. We are broad, but I think what the plan process does. It's okay. I'm coming to my finale. I think it pushes us to narrow, and it pushes us to become unrepresentative. Where we were representative and gender balanced and age balanced, we become less representative. People are happy to come together around tangible projects, and we do. The mosque, we have a project, the mosque, Mini Holland, but because people find themselves unreasonably contained by this planning process, and I agree with a colleague on the limitations of the planning process. I think it pushes us to be unstrategic, pushes us to be unfunded, and it pushes us to be unprotected, all those things that we should be achieving through getting a neighbourhood plan. So in a funny sort of way, I really sort of slightly take issue to this business about not having professional skills. It's not that we don't understand. We really understand. I think a lot of people around the table and beyond understand. It's that we don't really accept the process is fit for our needs. So we understand it very well, and it's limiting. We find it limiting. We're limited in the type of projects that we want to achieve and the type of work we want to achieve, and we find the process as sort of narrowing and sort of reducing. And so I think it could be a lot better. I think it could be more flexible. Don't get me started on the funding. I think everybody else has covered that. And the resources, we do all this for free, with no help whatsoever from Wandsworth Council. Indeed, we were £2,000 short and they couldn't find it in their budget, even though we had probably 10 meetings to get that measly £2,000 out of them. So, on that note, a challenge.
Okay. It's an interesting note to end on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Because what we're hearing is that the process isn't, with all that amount of community building, community development, community cohesion, the process is too limited to contain it. And I think we really want to develop that. Maybe we'll hear, then we're going back now to our panel. We will come back to you, so be thinking about recommendations to government, to councils, to the mayor, about the process. So, who's taking next?
It's me, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you, Chair. From what we've heard here, I've got a few questions, and the names on the list I have here are Sharon, Brian and Henry to respond in the first instance. And this is about the process, how successful has it been, or we've also heard about challenges. So it is mainly to do with level and quality of community engagement, how it was achieved, and what good or otherwise has it done. So on the question of process and what we've heard, the first question is in the context of what we heard from the 6 participants, what is actually being achieved by neighbourhood planning?
And could you take on board the limitation argument too?
Or the limitations. I mean, I guess what we've heard from the people here is a huge amount of work and effort and energy, I guess, to get their voices heard and to get things in place that they really want. So I have some sympathy with Stephen's comment that if the planning process was better and more responsive, then maybe you wouldn't need to be doing neighbourhood planning. But at the same time, that's the place where we are. And unless communities can influence the planning policy of the various layers in London, then it becomes that this is the best possible way for communities to have their voices heard and to be able to offer alternatives. And I think we're in a place with the London Plan where the numbers that are increasing, and we are focused on numbers and how that impacts particularly on poorer communities, becomes more and more difficult. And I know there are some questions later on that talk about that more strategic place. But I think that everybody around that has spoken needs congratulating on their efforts and time and energy to get as far as they have done, despite, with some of the boroughs, some horrendously difficult challenges, I would say. And hope that we see more, really. Does that sound a bit vague? Navin, have I answered your question all right?
You have pretty much, yeah. We will be coming back to if you remember anything else. Brian?
Yeah, I would certainly agree that there's a lot of work is going on, a lot of community engagement, bringing the community together, which is one of the benefits of neighbourhood planning, notwithstanding producing a planning document. It is that community cohesion, it is that community working together, and that's possibly been more of an achievement for neighbourhood planning in London than actually producing 12 plans that's got through so far. But 12 plans have got through and more are coming through, and they will influence development within their area. And what neighbourhood planning does add, even notwithstanding all the limitations, it does allow communities to get down to a lower level of detail in terms of their local area, which a borough plan is never going to get into that level of detail across its whole borough. So if you are talking that very fine-grained element, neighbourhood planning can bring that.
So can I just, sorry, because there's this point made by Roger, sorry about that, but about, well, no, it wasn't Roger, sorry, who was it who talked about it? Steve, the NPPF, if planning policy was right, local plans were right, then you wouldn't have to do neighbourhood planning. But you're making another point, aren't you, a different point? When you're making a point saying, even if you had all that, you'd get something more from...
Yes, neighbourhood planning takes it down to a more detailed lower level than you're going to get from other levels of policy. So a borough plan is never going to get into detail on all of its areas. Practically, it's just not going to happen. So.
And that's coming from, I say it in front of you, a borough planning officer who is probably...
Our policy is
really,
essentially...
really supports it.
Yeah, our policy applies across the whole borough, generally. We do get into some local areas, but we're not able to get into detail, neighbourhood level detail across the whole borough. It's just not possible for our plans to do. So neighbourhood planning does introduce that. Obviously, if the planning system's working better, there may be less reason for some of the groups to start up because they feel that it's not working for them, so they're trying to influence it, and I appreciate that. And councils have lots of issues with the planning system too.
We've heard from a couple of Neighbourhood Forum participants that councils have not been helpful at all, right from the start to now. As we heard from the last colleague, and there was a similar comment elsewhere as well. What do you say to that? How can we change that? Because this is about probably culture of the council, in a sense, how rigid their planning policy is, or how rigid they are in terms of engaging constructively with the local communities.
Yeah, I don't know the detail of what happens in each council. I do know in general terms, supporting neighbourhoods, doing neighbourhood planning can be a challenge for boroughs too. In terms of resources, the councils receive some money from the government, which essentially pays for our expenditure. The councils have to pay for certain consultation, we have to pay for the referendums, we have to pay for the examination, and the money we get from the government basically gets sucked up in that. So any support that councils are providing for communities and neighbourhood planning, essentially the council is sort of subsidising that and paying for that staff resources. So some councils have very small planning policy teams and probably not very well resourced planning policy teams. And they probably struggle to do the things that they're supposed to do themselves without neighbourhood planning. So I don't know the situation in all of them, and there may be cultural reasons, there may be objections to the concept of neighbourhood planning, I don't know, but certainly in resource terms it is challenging for councils. This is on top of their existing work. They don't get any extra money to pay for the staffing for that. So, in terms of looking for more council support, there's a resource issue there certainly, and councils would need more resources to be able to give more support to communities. We do our best within the resources we have. At Camden, we're relatively well off in terms of our planning policy team, in terms of the size of the team, but we do find it difficult to support communities and manage our own work, and it's only getting worse with our budgets being cut. Council budgets have been cut, and planning has suffered more than most within council budgets in terms of the cuts that have happened over recent years.
I'd like to pick up on that point about why the pattern across London is as uneven as it is. As part of the work for London neighbourhoodplanners.london, I've done 3 sort of desktop surveys of how each London planning authority, including the MTCs, has been approaching neighbourhood planning. The first one was looking at neighbourhood CIL a few years ago. When the government introduced neighbourhood CIL, which is a 15% element which is meant to go to local neighbourhoods, that was seen very much as a bribe to encourage neighbourhood planning, and for parishes they actually get the cash in hand and they can allocate it as they see fit. In London, the 15% neighbourhood element of SIL remains with the local authority, and if you look across London, a lot of authorities barely mention that fact, do not explain on their website that neighbourhood SIL exists. Again, there are exceptions. Brent has a well-established process now of allocating large sums of neighbourhood SIL at Wembley and elsewhere. And this is a resource that lots of community groups across London are unaware it exists. It can be used as revenue funding for support neighbourhood planning. Camden, I think, has dipped its toe in the water on that, but it's not happening elsewhere. So that was the first one. And as you do these surveys, you begin to realise that there's a bit of a consistent pattern across London. The second one was how local authorities deal with neighbourhood planning in their local plans. I mean, the bare minimum, which an inspector will normally pick up on these days, is they have to say the development plan for the area is made up of the London plan, the local plan, and any made neighbourhood plans. Some boroughs even manage to avoid saying that, and you can do a word search on their local plans and you will not find neighbourhood planning mentioned at all. And disappointingly, even in recent ones coming through the system, that is still happening. We had to remind the GLA planners that London now has a 3-tier planning system and not a 2-tier planning system. And with reasonable grace, they made the edits to the draft London plan, but I had to go along to the EIP and again point out that the London plan in its new form is not very good on explaining where neighbourhood planning fits in. It's not particularly encouraging or supportive, and that is surprising. If you look back at the Boris 215 one, it actually was a little more warm towards neighbourhood planning, and we neighbourhood planners across London wonder why that is. Then the third one was statements of community involvement. Government has recognised that local authorities are not always being supportive, so in characteristic Whitehall fashion, they legislated in the 2017 Neighbourhood Planning Act to make it now a statutory requirement that when a borough produces its statement of community involvement, which remains a required document, it must have a section now saying what assistance and advice they will give to neighbourhood forums. Again, when you look across London, very few boroughs and planning authorities even appeared to pick this up. It was in the letter to chief planning officers. Nothing happens. Lambeth was an exception in going back and adding an addendum to their SCI. Even the new statements of community involvement coming through now, we have to chivvy and remind them to include this section. Most then say, oh yes, well we never realised that regulation was yet in force. It's been in force since last July. So I mean, this pattern, you can begin to detect trends. Our colleague Graham has done a statistical analysis of, are there any other patterns? Is it Labour authorities and Conservative authorities and Lib Dem authorities? Is that making a difference? No correlation. Is it deprived areas versus affluent areas? No correlation. So you exhaust possible explanations for why this pattern has emerged, and it does seem pretty clear it's mainly cultural, in some cases political level, opposition to the concept of neighbourhood planning as taking away a power, if you like, that the local authority should be implementing. In many cases, I think it's a level of officer resistance from directors downwards who do not like the idea of non-professionals getting involved and coming up with potential variations to their own planning policies. And in some cases, I think it's just that planning officers who are, as Brian says, often hard-pressed and not huge in numbers, see it as a potential hindrance and not a help. And a bit later on, I'd like to come back on how neighbourhood plans can in fact be a help rather than a hindrance, and that is widely recognised in rural areas outside London, only just beginning to be recognised inside London.
Henry, does the neighbourhood planning process help build stronger communities and also more inclusive ones?
I think it's a very good educational process for people who want to get involved in how the planning system works or does not work, or the results that they see creating harm in that area. The plan I did in North Kensington, conventional forms of community engagement, people coming along to a church hall to discuss different policies in the plan at each stage. But we would get audiences of 40 to 60, which is a lot more, to be honest, than the Kensington and Chelsea Council get when they discuss their local plan chapters. It does mean people learn about spatial planning. Not everybody can have what they want. There have to be trade-offs and compromises. They understand about viability studies. They understand you cannot simply say, we would like this, that and the other. That's not going to happen unless you're working with the grain of the system. So in that sense, I think it is good. But I would also accept what several of the witnesses have said, is that it can have the potential to be narrowing, because at the end of the day, your examiner will say you can only include stuff that deals with the planning and development of land, because that is the Town and Country Planning Act limitation. If you want other ideas about projects, initiatives, you can include them, but they'll have to be in an annex, they'll have to be in a separate document. You can't have policies around those things. You can't have policies about, changing bus timings and routes, because that isn't to do with the development of land. So it is narrowing in that sense, and as one of the witnesses was very eloquently saying, that can limit the inclusivity and diversity of people who become involved, because at the end you do come down with a more hardcore of people prepared to spend the time getting stuck into planning issues per se, and that can mean other people drop out when they realise, well, this isn't going to help me get my particular project or initiative off the ground, because it's not a planning project at the end of the day. And I think, we're seeing in Spitalfields at the moment, are we not, which is proposing a Queen's Park type parish council in London. That's becoming an area of contention, with people saying, well, this is a middle class articulate thing and it will only do the sort of things that part of the community want, and it's not for the rest of us. So there is that risk.
Sharon, from your experience, from your knowledge, do you reckon the process does help communities to be more inclusive and stronger, and therefore adding value?
So the work that we did with our Trust for London funding from 2014 was kind of a bit wider to start off with, really. It was about bringing networks of community groups together who might be interested in the planning system full stop, and focusing very much on the development of the local plans in both the LLDC and later in the OPDC area. That covers some of the issues of across boundaries. So I don't think any of the neighbourhood plans that are here, they are. There's so Leo's in Harlesden, niches in a wee bit into the old Oak Park Rural Development Corporation area. Are any of the others across borough boundaries? Not too many. But a lot of them may also be adjacent to some of the big opportunity areas that have cross-borough things. So there's lots of things that are kind of impacting on. I think so our work, as I say, focus first of all on trying to support groups who might want to just be interested in planning policy full stop, and groups that would not ordinarily engage. So groups that are from less well-off communities, I guess, was what we were focused on, and that's where many of the large-scale developments are taking place in London area. Anyway, it's where the mayoral development corporations are. They all have within them tightly packed neighbourhoods that are in the lower end of economic advantage, I would say. So there's lots of bits and pieces of things that are in the mix there. But what we found in the work that we did in and around the LLDC area was that people were very much becoming focused around what was happening on the Carpenter's estate and wanted to provide support for that. So that support network wanted to do that, and we went on to sort of support that further. And having worked with Loretta Lees to get a bit of funding in, the notion was there needs to be something bottom up rather than kind of top down. So that's the kind of work that we did with initially, and there was a huge amount of sway of support for that in the first place. But I would agree that kind of gradually, as the years have gone by, people have urgent issues that they want addressed. particularly in poorer communities, I would say. So the planning process for that full stop takes a longer period of time. It's a long-term plan that says this is what's going to happen, and some people go, well, actually, we need this bit sorted out now. So there are problems with the processes of planning in lots and lots of different ways. I think the technicalities of that are very difficult for people. They go, okay, this is where we're happy to have a bit of development of some more homes. This is where we need to address issues of private housing. This is where we need to address issues of wanting more affordable housing. Those things are easy for people to kind of pick up and talk about, but it's trying to then get it into a document that is quite technical and answers, might answer a planning inspector's questions around and then how this fits in with a local plan or the London plan. So all of those things become more and more difficult. So the early stages, I think, you're right, are probably easier for people to engage, to do the door knocking, to get people together. And by the time you have to really get down to the technical detail, then it is much more difficult.
Can I just ask on that? I mean, the neighbourhood plans aren't allowed to conflict with the local plan, but how is that sort of managed? Do you get people wanting to put things in there that are in conflict? Do boroughs contest things that are put in and say, hang on, no, this does conflict with our policies? How is that sort of process managed?
I mean, there was a fair bit of conflict. I mean, if we look at the carpenters, there was a fair bit of conflict there because until the LLDC was in place, then Newham had a local plan. And their local plan didn't quite match with the influence that some of the community groups managed to have on the LLDC local plan, particularly around, for example, the Carpenters estate or the greater Carpenters neighbourhood area. And I suppose some of that is still there. So there's conflict there between, I mean, I haven't been out there for some time, but there certainly was conflict there between Newham and I guess the LLDC. I mean, Newham went along when the Carpenters guys went along to get their neighbourhood plan, get the forum designated. The borough, the what's his name? I can't even remember his name now. Whoever was the leader of the council in Newham went along and spoke against it.
Was it?
Robin.
It was Robin,
yes.
Went along and argued against the forum even being designated. So you can imagine those tensions are really, really difficult for people. So at the end of the day as well, trying to keep people involved sufficiently to say this could be a strong enough plan for you to be able to go through and to be able to, you know, have the support of the LLDC on this. I mean, the problem there is that the local authority owns the land that part of the neighbourhood forum area holds. Yeah, so.
The legal position is
tensions.
It's not simply conflict. It's that you have to conform.
You have to conform
generally with the strategic policies in the plan. So there is room for debate as to what policies are strategic.
Example, haven't you? I was very interested in the fact that. Wait a minute, it was the first example, Roger's example.
Well, Kentish Town, ours was similar. We had an area of an employment zone in this part of North Kensington, and one of the main reasons we started doing a neighbourhood plan was just sitting there with light industrial units from the 80s, not doing very much, just warehouses for antique dealers in Portobello. We said this street could be different. We want mixed use in this street. Council sits there saying, no, we have policy CF5 that says B1 uses only in an employment zone, B1 or B8.
Yes.
That's it. You can't have mixed use. Yes. And this was 4 chunks of the street which has been mixed use since the 19th century. We said that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking as a planner. You sit there, you colour bits in on a map, and you say only certain uses there. Move on. You know, one of those units turned very successfully into co-working space with several firms of architects, designers. So we use that as a bit of a model. The Director of Planning sent emails saying you cannot alter our policies. That cannot be done. So we had to point him to the NPPF, point him to National Planning Guidance and say, well, that's for the examiner to decide, not you. So the examiner at the end of the day accepted our evidence on vacancy levels and rents and all the rest and said, yeah, fine, have mixed use in those 14 units. The irony now is that the council's come back to us 2 years on because of Grenfell, they're in real problems on their housing numbers. They've stopped all their big estate renewal schemes. They're now saying, well, actually, that is quite a good idea to have mixed use and housing above these light industrial units. How can we help you encourage that to happen? So we're now talking a design code for that street, and they are very positive towards something which wouldn't be in their local plan were it not for a neighbourhood plan persuading an examiner.
That's very interesting because it aligns with the draft London plan as well. I was wondering, Brian, what was your experience then with Roger and the Kentish Town Neighbourhood Forum coming along and saying, we want to intensify the employment here, but we want to build houses on the industrial site? How did you respond to that then?
Well, we were thinking similar things at the same time, and there was a developer who was interested in that area too. So there was sort of a number of ideas coming together at that time. So we were preparing our local plan at a similar time to the forum was producing their plan. So we were able to kind of do the two things at once. So when the neighbourhood plan started, we had two pieces of land which were in industrial designation. We changed the designation of one of those through the local plan, so it's now designated as a growth area for housing, employment-led mixed-use redevelopment. So where we were heading and where the forum were heading, we were basically heading in the same direction around the same time, so we're able to work that together. And now we're preparing a planning framework for that area, and we're working with the forum. The difficulty, what we were trying to do, was actually with the GLA, who objected to our redesignation of the area as contrary to the London plan. So they objected to the first draft of our local plan. We did some extra evidence work, we negotiated with them, and by the time we submitted our plan, they were supportive, and what's come through the new London plan is essentially in line with what we've done there in terms of saying, let's look at these industrial areas. Can they be intensified? Can they bring in other uses? Can they be more productively used to meet the growth needs that London has? So it was certainly a more positive experience at Kentish Town than maybe Henry's experience.
So you are going to conform then with the no net loss of industrial premises?
Well, we have to then.
Because the thing is that, these local strategic industrial locations have gone down from 25% in boroughs in the last few years to 14% of all the land, of the land in London. And it's very, very worrying, actually, in a way.
Right. I mean, our policies will expect at least re-provision and ideally increase of floor space, increase of industrial uses, retention of existing business as far as possible.
Because you desperately need to, the waiting list now on the actual strategic industrial locations, because they're the only ones that have really been to a certain extent protected, is it's huge.
Yeah, we do appreciate
fear for what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we do appreciate the need for the industry as well.
Yeah.
But there are parts of London where the industry is very, very low density. It's not the most efficient use of land, and you can do better, and you can make more, and you can deliver the employment, and you can deliver the housing, and you can deliver community uses, open space, lots of other things too. So.
Sure, it's what the London plan is trying to set out, isn't it? Yeah. And in fact, most industrial locations are very low density.
May I just intervene? So,
yes.
On this question of industrial, it's an expression that troubles me slightly. It sounds very 1970s to me.
It's light industry.
Yes, but industrial has pictures of smoking chimneys and people coming out of mines with miners' helmets on and so forth. I refer specifically to the new economy. Are you at the GLA talking about employment rather than housing, or are you talking about something different when you refer to industrial?
It's light industry often, most of it.
But the strategic industrial land, the uses that you are allowed within it are extensive these days, and a lot of them are not metal banging, noisy, creating fumes. They're logistics depots.
We're a service economy. A lot of it's very light industry. It's creative industry. Andrea, you want to come in?
Yeah, just very briefly to say that in the last 3 years in our neighbourhood plan area, we've lost 80,000 square metres of industrial space. And Lewisham, as you know, has got a very low GDP compared to other boroughs in London. And I think, one of the things we've been trying to address through the neighbourhood plan, as well as introducing the circular economy, which is great, the GLA is supporting more of the circular economy, but a sort of recycle, reuse, upcycle type economy. And, we've been arguing that we really need small pieces of industrial land to establish, local employment around things like recycling, reusing, whether it could be like food, waste recycling in Deptford, local to all the estates, etc. And also we've got interest from a local businesswoman that wants to set up a textile recycling unit which would create 70 jobs in Deptford. You've got over 100,000 people every day leaving Lewisham to come into other parts of London to work, and of course all of that money that they spend while they're working doesn't, goes with them as well. And that's another reason why Deptford and some of the other places around Lewisham are dying, and the local shops and independent shops are dying. And there's not enough holistic approach in planning when planning applications come up to look at the other aspects and not just, oh my God, we need homes, because the homes we're getting certainly aren't the right homes. We had one social rent home last year in Lewisham, one, and 110 the year before. And we know that we need about 1,700 a year. So all these bits of land that were industrial and around Deptford, there are 13 developments around Deptford. That's how densified Deptford is becoming. And you look at how much housing has been provided in those, and then you look at the proportion of housing that's actually meeting the assessed housing need. And it's about, on average, 12% that you're getting out of those developments. And it's not enough to make a difference, and that's why it's all messed up.
Okay, that's very helpful. A lot of these arguments have been rehearsed very, very well at the examination in Publica of the London Plan. But of course the new London Plan is actually trying very hard to get much more social housing in London. Shall we...
Chair, I've got
have you finished your questions?
two further questions which I'll merge into one, and starting with Brian, and that's to do with the lack of financial resources as well as technical support. How much of that is slowing down the whole process? And also, are there any other barriers which are promoting the neighbourhood planning?
Certainly the resources and technical support is slowing down the process. We had experience in Camden of forums basically are struggling because they've run out of funding, essentially. They have no more, they can't access more, but they aren't at the end of the process. So there's things that they need to do, but the money's not available. And when they started out, that money would have been available, but the goalposts have changed on the way through, and that is causing problems. And I think one of the related concern then is that, as well as actually just getting your plan through, it potentially affects the quality of the plans as well. The technical support isn't there for things that people need. Tony mentioned it, doing a character study where you can actually start explaining what it is about the character of your area that's important, so that planning decisions take them into account. If you can't access the funding to do that, then that's a missed opportunity within your plan. We're big believers of health checks for neighbourhood plans. Then within the process of neighbourhood plan, it's common to have a health check before you submit your plan to make sure that it's going to meet the requirements. In the past, we've always had these with our plans. We've got our first plan going through now. Haven't had a health check because the support isn't available for that. So there's an issue in terms of just the resources of actually physically getting it done, but also in terms of the quality and actually the plan that's coming out at the end, I think potentially would be affected as well. I think that's a concern.
Can I say something about accessing the funding as well? Because of this new business about what you can spend it on, we have to type of contort ourselves. So we want this character because it's fundamental to what our place is. So we've spent our first 9,000 on that, which should be on something else. And then to access the technical packages, we have to do things that we wouldn't particularly want to do. We don't particularly want to do a design code, and we really don't have the capacity to allocate for housing because we probably have no sites. But we are doing both to access, there's a sort of gateway process to access the technical support, which will do the plan writing, which we don't particularly want to do. So if it had just done the other way round, and we'd have, you know, in a sequential, sensible way, and actually in a way that creates great places for people, we would get what we want. But as a result, we're having to go inside out to get what we need. And most people, I don't think, would really be able to manage that, sort of knowing what they need. And because we have a lot of people who do, we've done this contorted process, but it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. You know, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but we're turning ourselves inside out to get bits of funding here and there, in short.
So what you're saying is that the requirements and the technical support, you know, in order to get the gateway, that they're like a straitjacket. They make you.
Well, you can only get the technical support if you're going to allocate for funding, allocate for housing, or you do a design code, or there's other things which we couldn't possibly meet. But for us, those are the two things. We have an area that doesn't have sites, so we can't allocate for housing. And we have an area that probably wouldn't naturally lend itself to a design code because we've not got much to design. You know, and that's my background, so I know. But we will sort of twist ourselves around to get a design code for the public realm, to access the funding for someone to write the plan for us, the technical support to write the plan for us.
Right.
So we've gone inside out.
Yeah. Have you got, I don't know, I just wondered whether Tony wanted to comment on that.
Well, I recognise that completely. I mean, the criteria in the new support programme from the government are much tighter and much more directional down particular issues that the government is interested in.
I.e. building homes.
I.e. homes, design codes and whatever. So it shut down opportunities on certain things like character studies, and it's not, you cannot access the grant simply through the complexity of being a neighbourhood forum. So rather than the mantra of the Localism Act and neighbourhood planning this was about putting power in the hands of people to do what they want for their area, and we will provide the resources to enable that. That's sort of only going so far. And now it's much more directed as to what you can get the money for, or as Brian's pointed out, for some forums they've been caught in the middle. They've moved the goalposts. So they thought that they could plan and programme the development of their plan in the expectation they get funding, 6 months, 9 months down the road to do whatever it is they needed to do, and that's just been taken away from them. So as a minimum, we need to put back the flexibility of the old support programme, and frankly that could have been more flexible. We could spend the £24.5 million much better to deliver neighbourhood planning. We could certainly deliver it better for urban areas.
I think that's the point, isn't it? It's fine for parish areas that have got hundreds of sites, and that's very proper that they should be allocating for housing, but for places in London that probably don't, that's not really our issue. It's to make the place better.
Just one more point as well about resourcing too, that there's no resources for neighbourhood forums once they've adopted their plan.
Sorry, no?
Once you produce your plan, there's no resource then, there's no support. So Kentish Town have got their plan, they're looking to input into do various projects, but there's no source of funding for that work.
One of the things I wanted to say, I mean, it's very, one of the limitations has been that people throw up all sorts of other things, and I've done a neighbourhood plan myself when I was chair of planning in the late 80s, early 90s, and one of the things was people come up with all sorts of recommendations and ideas which don't fit into the plan, but a sympathetic local authority, or one that's got the resources, might want to take up with them those groups, maybe. I mean, it seems to me that you said it was an annex, just simply an annex.
Well, Tony is an examiner of neighbourhood plans, so most say you can have a part 2, if you like, which is a separate document. But it doesn't include policies, it includes initiatives, projects, aspirations, whatever. But it's not part, if you like, of the statutory neighbourhood
Shouldn't
plan.
there be a sort of almost parallel community project planning process?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Nicky, because that was the original concept. But when the Localism sort of Act was being thought through, it became more focused on sort of a rather more narrowly defined sort of Town and Country Planning Act definition of development and change, once the sort of civil servants got hold of it. So, but the real world, keeps pushing against that. So the stuff that excites people is, yes, they're interested in the development, but they're also interested in all the other things they want to do for their area, which improve the quality of life in their area, which manage change in their area. And that's why you see bubbling through this process, despite, rather than because, a whole bunch of other things, and then they find other ways to reflect those in the document. So almost all neighbourhood plans have a list of projects, they all give it different names, of other things that people want to do for the area. Some of those are a lobbying tool on the local authority. We want this, we want that. Some actually got nothing to do with the local authority. They could get money or support from elsewhere. I think a critical link here, though, is that the delivery of a lot of those, actually that's exactly what community infrastructure levy should be about. That a well-judged neighbourhood plan both enables the development to take place in planning terms, from which the value can be captured, which can then be invested in other forms of community infrastructure. So still should be used, there should be a much clearer link to enable the delivery of a range of these other projects off the back of the development that's taking place in the area. If you do that, you'll both incentivise more people to be involved in neighbourhood planning, and you'll get a much more rounded set of outcomes. That's precisely how it works outside, wherever you've got a parish or town council. It's a real shame that we can't do it better in London. Now, there's a legal barrier at the moment that you can't physically give the money to a neighbourhood forum because they're not a public body, whereas a parish or town council is. But there could be stronger requirements to connect more clearly what's in a neighbourhood plan and the spend of the neighbourhood SIL, as Henry has. But most boroughs, understandably, on one level, are seeing this as money to spend on all the other things the boroughs want to spend the money on, as opposed to what the communities want to spend the money on.
Brian, can I just... You said there were no resources and so on, but can I just ask, people have said to me, some people have said, oh, Nikki, you don't really need neighbourhood plans, you just need a really good area action plan. Now, would an area action plan, would that have money for community projects?
The area action plans that are produced by councils rather than the community. So obviously that's a decision that you want to make about who's responsible for producing the plan.
So it's not community led.
It wouldn't be community led. It would be led by the council. And similarly, any money would only and resources would only be available for any projects in that, insofar as the council decided to spend it on that. And so there's no real difference in that sense.
Some boroughs have chosen to use area action plans as a way of stopping a neighbourhood plan, haven't they?
Yeah. I'd ask Andrew to ask the question.
Just to lead on from that discussion, why not parish councils? We've got one, seems to be working very fine, and it's not a middle class ghetto as everyone assumed in Queen's Park.
Yeah.
It's actually a very mixed community and seems to be functioning quite well. Why haven't we chosen more?
But we have thought about it for our bit of North Kensington, but again, it's another process you have to go through. As a neighbourhood forum, you can miss some of the process in terms of triggering a referendum and so forth. But precepts, I think it'll take a little longer to catch on in London. Queen's Park, as you say, I've followed closely, and it does seem to be, they've done the community council first, neighbourhood plan to follow, which is a route that can be pursued. Yeah.
Can I?
Yes.
It comes down to funding again, because somebody asked Stafford if we want to do a parish council, and they said we'll give you £10,000. That's not enough money for us to go through that whole process and get everyone.
No, actually, my understanding of the process of parish council is much quicker than doing a neighbourhood forum, because you just
you have to have a governance review.
You have a governance review, but the council pays for that.
Yeah, the council pays for it.
Yeah, so it's not you don't have to pay for it. You just need 10% of the residents to sign a petition.
I think I certainly have been in a number of conversations where that's been on the agenda. I think there's a difficulty in sort of double running, the idea of a parish and town council and the idea of a neighbourhood sort of plan, because that can be confusing to people when you're talking to them. I would anticipate we will see more coming forward in London. I think it is a sort of natural end game for a number of the sort of more advanced places. I think the process could be simplified even more. You only jump one step at the moment. I think there does need to be a bit of sort of support to enable it to happen.
Can I just ask, I mean, some of the people that were commenting earlier were saying that some people lose a bit of interest during this, but you must not require an awful lot of stamina to go through this process to actually get a plan. And some people drop off because they realise their project won't get off the ground, whereas with the parish, of course, they've got remits to do all sorts of projects, and they can do that.
Yeah, that's the carrot. It's whether it's enough of a carrot. It's sort of jam tomorrow, and it's a bit of a process to get to the jam. I think we will see more. I think we need more examples of where it's working for people to know about it. Just like neighbourhood planning actually spreads when you see somebody else doing it, we need more spreading of the word through the delivery of it.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging me on that, because it's something I could spend ages talking about, but that's not what we're here for. Could I ask Ms. Brunskill-Powell about some of the recommendations you might have to improve the process? We've heard some of them as a part of the discussions, but perhaps you could summarise what your conclusions are to improve the process of producing a neighbourhood plan.
Yeah, so the way that we did the report was to begin with a literature review, and then we interviewed and visited 7 different case studies, and we sort of worked through these different themes that were coming up as we spoke to people. And we collated these into a list of key findings, and the recommendations come out of that. So there's this sort of distilling process. And they address this double problem that these areas that do experience socioeconomic disadvantage, that score highly in the indices of multiple deprivation have, as well as being in London where everything is just exponentially more complex. So there are 4 sort of areas where we make recommendations. So the first is on improving the process of neighbourhood planning. The second is on what we're calling mainstreaming neighbourhood planning.
When you say improve the process, how do you mean improve? What specific?
So within that sort of broad recommendation, it comes back to what I think we've all been discussing really, which is how to get social policies and things that aren't strictly speaking planning issues into the neighbourhood plans in a way that gives them a bit of weight, so that people feel like those things are being included, and because, as Tony said, that's what people get up in the morning for. That's what gets people involved in neighbourhood planning. So to then tell them halfway through, no, none of these things that you're interested in are a planning issue or can be translated into a planning issue, which is, and that's one of the big challenges, is translating these two things into a format that fits within this slightly narrow sense of what a neighbourhood plan can do. So it's really one for the national government, but thinking about how this sort of flexibility can be built into it. And the second one is about milestone wins. So we've talked a lot about the duration of neighbourhood planning. Of the 12 ones that are made in London, so quite a small sample, the average duration is 49 months, which is just over 4 years. And when you look at the locality roadmap, which is this sort of toolkit that they give you to guide you through the neighbourhood planning process, very comprehensive, they say that the time you should expect to spend on it is between 18 and 24 months. So it's taking twice as long, over twice as long in London. And one of the ways that I think would be to break up this time and to stop people dropping off would be to introduce milestone wins. So this could be something like unlocking additional resources as you get through the plan. It could be having ways for the GLA and the Mayor's funds and Good Growth Fund, for example, to elevate the projects that come up.
So is there something specifically London that means it's 49 months rather than 24 months?
No parish to begin with.
So this is actually from designation. So this doesn't include the potentially 2 years it could spend you to get designated as it could take you to get designated as a form. 4 years after designation.
So outside London, they're getting it in 18 to 24 months.
So we don't actually know how long it takes. This is how long they're being told that it should take.
It should take. Okay.
which is
I think it is slow in London for all the reasons we've been discussing. Authorities who don't even respond. I mean, we had to wait a year for a designation application just because they didn't quite understand the system. We had 6 months of argument with the planning director as to whether you could vary a policy or not vary a policy. In fact, we had 2 years after our referendum where a landowner developer challenged the council's decision, and that took 2 years to go through the High Court. So it doesn't always take.
So is it a cultural thing here? I mean, the only unique thing I can see about London is that you know, the oldest form of local government actually in existence, unreformed, is the London Borough. Curiously enough, everything else has been reformed to death. But it strikes me that the London Borough are not used to having a tier of government underneath them.
Particularly one that has some statutory
whereas
power.
out in the counties and the districts,
Very different relationship. And as I said earlier, they see, in many districts, they will see parishes and villages producing a neighbourhood plan as a positive because they know their local plan's falling out of date, they don't have policies to block speculative developers buying up fields where they don't want housing, and they're only too keen to work with parish councils, town councils, and say, get your neighbourhood plan in place. I mean, that's why I think in London we need this attitudinal change, perhaps particularly in some of the huge regeneration areas like Old Oak, where for a whole host of reasons, and as Sharon knows, the local plan's already taken, 4 years from Boris's vision to the EIP hearings the other week, and I'm not sure the inspector's going to be very happy with everything in the plan and not require further major modifications, whereas the group of residents in the areas all got together 2-3 years ago and said, why don't you designate the whole of Old Oak as a neighbourhood area, big, 280 hectares, but no bigger than some of the neighbourhood areas in London, and we will work with you. Because potentially it could be a quick process. It could be a process of putting together a meanwhile set of site allocations and uses and activities and community facilities, and even housing with a 10-year lifespan, self-build for all the construction workers on the station and at Heathrow. Whereas I suspect we may now be heading into an era where not much will happen at Old Oak because the major landowner, car giant, has said we don't want to play anymore.
Right.
And the land
I think
will
watch this space.
Yeah, watch this space. But it's an example of where I think some attitudinal change by planners in London could help.
I've been very bad about sort of drifting off. Can we return to your list, if you don't mind? If it's a quickie, would you mind?
Very quickly, just to come into the issue of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. More of a question for the committee, I think. What's the relationship that the committee intends, Sharon has hinted at that, between the mayoral development areas with the existing neighbourhoods? So we are thinking that we had a particular intention to link more clearly with Halston. And though we have very good relationship with the Old Oak Park Royal Development Corporation, however, what our ask is not being replied to.
I think it's something we could probably take offline because the Assembly has got a history of being concerned about the democratic deficit in mayoral corporations. So, but it's probably not something that we need to go in here. Let's talk later. Could you carry on your list? Would you mind? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So the third thing about improving the process is simplifying the routes into neighbourhood planning. So the kinds of information that the neighbourhood forums have to give locality for their first funding tranche is a lot of information for something that isn't even a body yet. It's not even an organisation. And for them to gather all of that information for free initially can be quite a lot of work. And removing some of these barriers to entry or simplifying them, or even having initial grants for scoping the possibility of neighbourhood planning in an area would significantly reduce these barriers to entry. So that's the sort of first group of recommendations which are really around the process. And then mainstreaming neighbourhood planning. So one of the key things is about sharing of information. So widening access for neighbourhood forums to use the kinds of information and the kind of data and potentially the kind of software, for example, things like Commonplace, that that local authorities have access to, thinking about how that can be shared in a way that allows forums to access it, and also data sets and survey information, but then also the other way around. So encouraging local authorities to think of neighbourhood forums evidence bases, which they'll have been gathering very diligently, thinking of those as a potential resource for their own work. So having this kind of mutual sharing, and the reason we call it mainstreaming is because that should be ideally part of the way that people think about neighbourhood forums as something that's an opportunity. And the final one is Tony's point really about SIL and finding ways to use that information in a way that can bring benefits, like funding benefits, because people are in their neighbourhood plans setting out what they want, and in their evidence bases they've got all this information out there. So the third one is a very obvious question of funding. Tony's touched on this, but revisiting the criteria for additional funding for neighbourhood forums, and also thinking about tailored packages of support for urban areas, because it is just much more complex. There isn't a local field that can be built on, and there is limited brownfield sites, and that is just the nature of living in a city. So reinstating additional grant funding, providing supplementary grants for areas that score very highly in the indices of multiple deprivation, because funding is limited. People can't fund things out of their own purse, and there isn't necessarily somewhere they can meet. So there's people that we spoke to were talking about sitting in pubs for 4-hour-long committee meetings, buying like a half pint of Coke between them all so that they could stay there.
Most of the meetings I've ever been to.
And then ring-fencing funding to spend on administrative support and communications. So even printing costs can be really, really strenuous when you have a £500 budget. Costs of getting people to go door to door, costs of building a website is a really expensive endeavour if you don't happen to have someone who can do that for free. And other things like project management, which I think people don't really think about, but if people are undertaking a 4-year-long project with all the management needs of a 4-year-long project, with people coming in and out and having to look ahead and having to manage a budget which is shifting, as Brian mentioned, the goalposts shift. So that's a really skilled thing to do, and having some funding to be able to do things like that, that would be really helpful, I think. And providing information on alternative funding sources. So I spoke with people from Harlesden, and they obviously have the Oak Foundation grant, which has been very helpful for them. Queen's Park had a small grant for a particular piece of engagement from the GLA. But so these alternative sources of funding are out there, but people don't necessarily know that they're out there, and having some guidance and having someone who can say, here's what's available, here's how you fill in the forms, here's what would make it applicable to you. That's another sort of big funding recommendation. And then the final one, which is really the biggest, is on capacity building and support. And that really applies to everyone who's involved in the kind of food chain of neighbourhood planning. So providing clarity over the duty to support neighbourhood planning for local authorities, because I think it's not clear from duty to support exactly how they should be supported. And setting out expected roles and responsibilities in a...
So the duty to support on behalf of the local authority's duty to support?
Yes.
There is a legal duty to support, but what that is unspecified, except it doesn't have to include money.
And that's a piece of work that Henry's done for neighbourhoodplanners.london as well, where he's talked about the extent to which local plans do express their support for neighbourhood forums. And so thinking about having a dedicated point of contact within councils, one of the things that people were saying was, we've been emailing this one person and then they left and nobody told us, and I've just been sending all of these emails into cyberspace for like 6 months, which can be incredibly frustrating, and it obviously contributes to the length of the process. Providing capacity building for neighbourhood forums in urban areas with high levels of deprivation, so additional technical support and things like networking events. So what Neighbourhood Planners London do is they have an annual conference, and that's a really good opportunity for people to get to meet each other. And as a result of the Neighbourhood Planners Conference this year, we work with Queen's Park, and Queen's Park mentioned that they've set up a sort of mini networking support group between Westminster forums, of which there are many. So they're now helping each other out because they've only got one that's, crossed the line. Mayfair's on its way there. But in that way they can kind of share what they've learnt from dealing with Westminster as a local authority, but also how to do neighbourhood planning in a dense urban context. Thinking about funding a point person who can be a point of contact outside of the local authority, but over the entire life of the neighbourhood planning process. So neighbourhood forums, there's a point that they can see up to often, or the ones that I spoke to, and then beyond that it's quite difficult to see what's coming up next, because if you haven't done it before you don't necessarily know, and the local authority could turn around and say, no, you need to produce a memorandum of understanding, or there's no sense of where they should be by when.
There's no support anywhere for that.
So
Localis do that, or give
so
some
locality produce a lot
locality,
of guidance and toolkits, but not so much in terms of the human resources. And obviously Neighbourhood Planners London are a voluntary organisation, and you will often take on technical consultants for particular pieces of work. So, for example, writing policy, something that ordinary people might not necessarily know how to do. And so having technical consultants helps very much with that part. And then you'll have ACOM to do this, that and the other sort of separate things. You might have somebody helping you produce your evidence base, but you don't necessarily have that long-term support that you can go to them with questions over the life of the project and say, where will we be in 6 months' time? What should I tell people? So that kind of support would be really, really useful, particularly in terms of project management, but also in terms of hiring appropriate consultants. Because if you don't have any planning background yourself, how do you know what to look for? And your budget is limited, and you don't want to waste it on hiring the wrong consultant for the wrong job.
It's just that I'm a bit confused as to what you're asking for here, because we talked about the need for funding in order to help manage and project manage, but you're now talking about another post or another person to.
Who could
quite get the distinction between the two.
So it's somebody who could. So the project management is something of a red herring. So the ring-fenced funding would be it could be something like hiring somebody, or it could be something like sending somebody on a course, or it could be something like project management software. So it could be any of those things, whereas this point person does a number of different things, one of which might include project management. So it's really I think the emphasis I want to put on that point is about long-term support rather than just having people dip in and out. It's about a long-term advisory role.
These are all things that the government, most of these things like the government should do. Is there something specifically you think that the Mayor of London could?
I mean, this could be something that the Mayor of London could do, because the issues in terms of duration do appear to be very much a London problem. So having recognition that London is a very different context in which to do neighbourhood planning, some of this additional support, advice, whatever format that would take, that could potentially come through the Mayor of London, or through the GLA. If you had a cohort of people who understood how it works in London, that could be something that the GLA could fund or support. Or
what about the GLA in terms of helping to promote the idea of neighbourhood plans?
So peer-to-peer learning is a big one. So having, I mean, even something like the annual conference that we just had for Neighbourhood Planners London, having the GLA engaged in something like that would be really, really valuable, because that could just elevate the status of what's already happening, and that's a role that I think the GLA could do very well. There's already so much going on in terms of funding small projects, community-led projects, so the GLA does a lot of. Having that be linked to neighbourhood planning could be a really good chance to, confer a sort of sense of legitimacy and just heighten the visibility of it, really, because that's...
We've tried for years to just get the GLA officers in a room to talk to them, but actually only about 2 weeks ago was the first neighbourhood planning meeting I've been to where there's been a GLA officer in the room.
We got that at the start, the whole neighbourhood process, when they said a lot of stuff to the mayor's staff.
And then the other thing with the GLA is seeing it as something which is corporate. It's not just planning. It's really central to the housing team. It's really central to the regeneration team. It's really central to the good growth agenda. It's really central to development corporations. It's really central to TfL.
Social integration.
All of those, and then the whole raft of things which the mayor is trying to do around sort of active citizens and community engagement and digital London, and there's a whole and of course it's not a silver bullet, but the answer to quite a lot of that is here's a ready-made tool which people are trying to work with.
Just to have a list,
talk about it and legitimate it and
have a list of contact officers would be good in different parts of the GLA. There's not a lot about neighbourhood planning on the GLA website last time I looked.
But it's almost like unleashing the energy that's there, because at the moment it's actively suppressed, whereas it could just be unleashed. There's lots. People are desperate to try and do stuff, but they're being sort of sat on, which is madness, really.
Which moves on to my next, final question in this part, which is about what more could the boroughs do? You've suggested some things, but I'm also quite interested. This document came to us quite late from Graham Pycock, but it and it came to us quite late, so we've only just had an opportunity to read it. But it seems to indicate that it's about political will, not political policies, but political will on a local authority as to whether or not they would encourage neighbourhood planning or not. And in my little, dipping my toe into neighbourhood planning a little while ago, I was astonished by the lack of help from my local authority on it. What recommendations would you have for fixing this sort of disparity in London between those who like neighbourhood planning and those object to anything that's not invented?
I suppose it is. I mean, there's no single answer to that question. It's one that we are constantly thinking about.
Camden's nice. We like Camden.
Brian works with all the other planners.
And Brian kindly invited us to the meeting that he convened, and there were lovely people. The neighbourhood planning officers in the boroughs were all lovely people.
They're not all there.
There were about 12, I think it was, something like that.
No, it was about 16.
16, sorry. 16. And there are obviously the 16 of the willing, who tend to go to these things and all the rest of it. So one of the challenges is always it's got to work for the slower ship as well as the people who've got the resources or the wherewithal or the wants. It has to be a mix of the carrot and the stick. I mean, there has to be some really basic requirements, and we flagged them. Just not meeting the law on that, regulations on statements of community involvement. If neighbourhood planning sort of was part of the soundness test of local plans, a few more local authorities would sit up and take notice, because something that mattered to them would actually be being judged on the basis of local plans, of neighbourhood plans. But regulation will only get you so far. We think there should be a bit more of it to sort of concentrate the mind. But it is something much more visceral, really, and cultural. And it's a conspiracy of silence, really. and you do see it not just in officers, you see it in elected members as well. Local ward councillors are brilliant at just sort of diverting the conversation onto something else, or saying, well, it's all fine, you know, pat, you don't really need to think about this here. And the moment you start to do issues which cross ward boundaries, or heaven forbid cross borough boundaries, because Crystal Palace actually thinks it's Crystal Palace, not the edge of 5 boroughs, for example, I mean, they just sort of despair. They can't get their head around it, and therefore they're against it. So there is no, I mean, London Councils is absent in this, and we can't get a response from London Councils. We have occasionally had a response from the GLA. So we need to find a way of, and we can sort of be whingy moany about this. I think we need more examples of where this is really helpful. You know, this is, if you're going to negotiate the kind of change you're going to need in the suburbs of London, whatever you think about the housing numbers, there's going to be a lot of it. You're going to negotiate that with community consent. If you're going to sort out, you know, our high streets, then you're going to need to find places where businesses and shopkeepers come together with local people. Well, if you're going to try and eke out more small sites, you'll find that neighbourhood planning is often a flexible and a more effective way of finding those small sites than you're going to get from elsewhere. If you're going to sort of convene the sort of the projects and the ideas around green space, or around community assets, or around all the other good growth agendas, neighbourhood planning is giving you a whole wish list of what it is that people want. Just take the opportunity and really see it as something which answers many of the challenges that you're already facing, as opposed to pushing it away.
Yes, sure. Final question.
Final
set of questions, which I think the answer to the opening one is going to be yes. Which is, I have a feeling. Which I'll start with Henry. Can neighbourhood planning add value to strategic and local plans?
Well, as I was saying
earlier,
I was a little worried we might be running out of time. I do think that the major regeneration areas, and it's not just the mayoral ones, there have been other biggish strategic regeneration areas where the response from local authorities is, this stuff is too big for you to worry about, pat on the head, as Tony says, and I think that is a mistake, because potentially it is a nimbler way of moving ahead in getting actual site allocation and planning policies into place. I mean, area action plans, SPDs, they can't create new policy, as I understand, whereas a neighbourhood plan is as solid as you can get in terms of material considerations to make planning decisions on. And it shouldn't be taking 4 years in London, and that could be done within, I reckon, 15, 18 months if you've got forum and local authority working together and wanting to get to the end of the process, rather than what's happening all the time now, which is either adversarial combat or just slow delay, obfuscation, inertia. So I do think, you know, the neighbourhood plan could be your friend, needs to be the message that a lot of London planning authorities begin to think about, but there's not been a great deal of sign as yet.
Can I just ask, can I ask, are you happy to just go on for a bit longer?
Just a few more minutes, yes.
Yeah. Because it would be good, because Andrea's been putting up a hand,
yes,
good to get ideas for some of this from some of the representatives as well as the panel.
Andrea, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of, I'd like to turn that around a bit and say about sort of if local authorities supported neighbourhood forums from the start, once they're designated, in terms of, say, for example, DNA's objectives, we're actually sort of going out of our way to try and hold up and support a whole variety of policies that are currently being ignored because of the housing agenda. So, you know, if, for example, Lewisham supported our policies, and I told you what our objectives were at the start, you know, we would actually get better community planning, a better placemaking, although I don't really like that term, and better holistic planning within our communities through that process, because we're always being told, until you go to referendum, basically, we're not going to take any notice of you until your plan is passed. You know, you can say what you want, you can come up with all this evidence, you can consult with all your communities, they can give their views, but hey, you know what, we don't have to listen to you until you've gone to referendum. And it's not a very constructive way of working, because actually all we're trying to do is to work with the local authority to help them do better. that was kind of our byline, helping Lewisham to do better. And for example, the statement of community involvement, I spoke to our neighbourhood planning officer, Chris Fraser. He's actually a really nice guy, he's lovely. And he said, oh yeah, we're drawing that up. And I said, but this is a statement of community involvement. We would like to be part of that process of drawing it up and then also help you engage on that. And he failed to see the irony of that happening. And in relation to Deptford, one of the ways, because obviously if we go to referendum, the neighbourhood plans, they run for 15 years. So it will go from 2020 to 2036. We're very keen to get more young people involved in that process because it's going to be the young people that are going to have the impacts of not just the neighbourhood plan, but London plan, the local plans, and obviously national plans as well, in their local area more than anything. And one of the ways that we're hoping that Lewisham will support us is Convoy's Wharf. One of these Section 106 agreements initially was for a community development trust to be set up, and that might be an ideal vehicle to create some kind of monitoring reviewing board for the neighbourhood plan that needs to be reviewed and monitored every 5 years, but you've still got the issue about the long-term funding. And in terms of funding for a resource for London neighbourhood forums, you've already got an excellent network of the sort of neighbourhood planning for Londoners network set up. If the GLA looked to fund that adequately, because everything they're doing, as they've said, is voluntary, you could have like a sort of resource centre for London neighbourhood forums to be able to get, if you like, mentoring, help and support, and maybe sort of physical help and support with, whether it's funding applications or filling in forms, applying through the whole nightmare of the sort of locality and localism process, because it's terrible. You apply for funding,
Andrea,
and you have to give it back,
and
then apply again.
Andrea, we have to allow other people.
I know. No, but that's just something.
That's very helpful.
I'm going to move along the table because we are sort of out of time. And so yes, the value that the neighbourhood plan can add to strategic and local plans, and thinking particularly about the extent to which you can support the Mayor's objectives in the London plan. So Tony, I'll come to you and then I will come back to you.
I sort of covered that a little bit in my sort of polemic earlier. I mean, I think in an environment where there's going to be so much significant change going on, you're going to have to negotiate that change locally with consent. Neighbourhood plans are on the shelf, ready to go, and are proven. They're beyond prototype. They're proven as a mechanism which can do that, both in terms of the densification of the suburbs or the small sites agenda around what you can do in terms of bringing business and local communities together, and if you believe what you hear around good growth, around estate regeneration, around sort of livability agendas in London, all of those end up with punchlines around, well, we've got to do it with community, we've got to involve communities, and yet somehow neighbourhood planning doesn't feature in whatever the recommendation is and whatever the report is. So make it part of the agendas you're already running with, and mainstream it into those, across the suite of responsibilities that the Mayor's got.
Thank you.
Can I say something quickly on that? I think there's just a flip in sort of thinking. Somebody talked about cultural thinking. What we're talking about is neighbourhood forums sort of being allowed bits of funding, and really the Mayor should be paying us to do this stuff. You should be paying us to do it, not the other way around. And indeed, many people are professionals who are doing it for free. Our shortfall in funding was supported by the consultants who did it because they care about it, for free, for pitiful amounts of money. It is for free.
Yeah, it is ironic that, and Brian mentioned it, the additional burdens money that goes to local authorities to support them, they get more money, the London boroughs, than the neighbourhood forums do to do neighbourhood planning through the locality programme. And yet they're the local authorities, and the neighbourhood forums are meant to be doing the neighbourhood planning. So this is all sort of wooden dollars in some ways. That the pot needs to be bigger and it needs to be more flexible. But there's a sort of disparity in that approach which just needs to be addressed.
The boroughs keep telling us how poorly funded they are, but they're much better funded than the people who are doing it for free, aren't they?
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely.
Or they'll spend,
they're very, very poorly funded.
£150,000 on an alternative project to the neighbourhood plan.
Yeah. Okay, Emma, I'll come to you now.
Yeah, I think the sort of real tagline for this report and our findings is about capturing the value in the neighbourhood planning process. Like the having the neighbourhood plan it's almost been shown to not be the be all and end all. What's coming out of the planning process is people making connections with the local authority, people coming up with these great grassroots projects, people having an evidence base and a mandate and a list of what people in the local area want. They understand the local area physically a lot better as well. And so I think no one's saying that neighbourhood forums should be master planning vast areas. Like, that's not the point. But there's no one who can better cover things like area characterisation or identifying small sites or just small scale interventions and small scale social projects, and I think that's really what we've all sort of been chorusing this afternoon. But I think one of the things that's a slight red herring is estate regeneration. So the process of estate regeneration, if it's being done by the local authority, the way that the process works doesn't run parallel with the way that a neighbourhood forum works. And what we found in the case studies that we spoke to was that neighbourhood forums can waste 18 months campaigning against an estate regeneration and not be doing their neighbourhood plan, and then it will still happen, and then there'll be resentment against the neighbourhood forum. And there's this sense that if it's constantly about blocking development, it doesn't really, it can often be problematic. I think you can end up with something that's a bit stalled. You can end up with a bad relationship with the local authority, and I think that's something where it's maybe not such a useful tool, unless it's something that's integrated into, say for example, you start your neighbourhood planning, you start your estate regeneration planning with the neighbourhood plan in mind and the list of what residents want. That's when it's useful. But I think it's when you're starting to do it halfway, it can cause so much tension and so many grievances that it can be a bit of a problem. High streets, though, I think it can be really, really powerful. Queen's Park is doing a lot of work on that and just thinking about what they want from their high street, and a huge proportion of their draft neighbourhood plan is about the Harrow Road and about shopkeepers.
Okay, did you want to come in? Sorry, it has to be quick, but yeah.
It's going back to Andrew's point about what can you actually do. As we go through the process, there's obviously a number of planning applications going through whilst neighbourhood planning is in draft form or wherever it is. And what's come across our attention is the planning committees do not have the knowledge, and there needs to be an evidence-based education for them so that they can make informed decisions, especially after a general election when a planning committee member has no knowledge whatsoever about planning, is being led by an officer whose mandate is about compensation and protecting the state, which is fair enough, but that is not a reason to dismiss a neighbourhood plan from the draft stage. And I think getting a pot of money for that kind of education, evidence-based education, is crucial as we move forward. Because these processes, if there's more and more plans coming up, committee members who are making those decisions, I've seen 70 light industry spaces disappear through that process, and that needs to stop.
I think that's a very good point about training. You do get very little, and immediately after the election, you're straight in onto a planning committee. So, yeah, very good point.
Tom, can I just say, this point you made about micro things and not master planning, and I noticed that Steve, wanted the Good Growth in Grove Park. He wanted the Good Growth Fund to help with master planning, and I've had experience of working with residents. Residents call me in to look at master planning and have worked very collaboratively on that. So I'm not sure that's a point I just want to pick up. I think communities can be very, very helpful at working with local authorities on master planning through the neighbourhood plans or through some other process.
Yeah, I don't think they should be doing. I think my point was more, yes, they should be feeding into that kind of thing because they have that understanding, but I think sort of expecting them to come up with something like that on their own is...
Well, not necessarily, but...
No, that was the whole point of the Good Growth Fund, is you hire strategic planners to do the job, not to then be told, put some flower pots there. I can do that. I can't do the master planning, which is why we're here applying for the Good Growth Fund. To then have it diluted, it was a waste of a year and a half, and a waste of £10,000 flushed down the toilet. You guys have ticked a box, you work with Neighbourhood Plan. We've got nothing. And that's...
Sorry, Tom, that was a diversion.
No, that's fine. I'll come to Brian and then Sharon to finish.
As soon as we're overrunning, I haven't necessarily got anything new to add, so
okay.
I'm happy to pass.
Sharon?
Okay, this crosses over. There's two questions, because there was question 5, which was around what could the mayor do?
Yes.
So that and whether he should promote neighbourhood planning in opportunity and regeneration areas, and then the benefit that communities or people who are doing neighbourhood planning can do both ways. And we have a huge problem with these opportunity areas, that there is no monitoring, full stop, of what's going on there. So that needs to be kind of point number 1, that what's being delivered in opportunity areas, full stop, needs good monitoring. Which was suggested at the examination in Public of the London Plan. But I think the kind of the benefits, if we look at what's also around a lot of these opportunity areas, is that there are low-income communities around them. And the impact on low-income communities is generally poor, not good. And I think if you look at the Harlesden Neighbourhood Forum and the work that they've done in Harlesden, I'm not saying Old Oak is the same, but that kind of level of deprivation in Harlesden and what they're doing within their neighbourhood plan needs to be something that's taken on board to gradually and more organically grow into what is a large-scale development area. Because at the moment you have this kind of this elephant of the Old Oak and Park Rural Development Corporation area that might have gold pavements around the edges, is that right, Henry? With big high-rise blocks up to God knows how much. Whereas it would be a much better area for everybody concerned if that kind of gradual moving on of what has already been done in one patch was moved on, that neighbourhood planning ethos of understanding the community and the particular grassroots needs would be hugely beneficial in any of those opportunity areas, I would say. Whether there's willingness by the mayor to allow that to occur, I don't really know, nor some of the boroughs. But with the boroughs could do a lot more. The boroughs could do a lot more, including putting the stuff on their websites about neighbourhood planning. That's missing in many, many areas. They could set up, there's only one that I know of in Ealing, where they have there's a voluntary sector network of groups who are involved in any way, shape or form in planning issues that comes together. They could encourage those within their boroughs. What else could they do? They could have done many things, but they're just a couple of suggestions of what the boroughs could do. And the mayor could support the boroughs or argue that the boroughs should do these kinds of things. He has power over them, doesn't he? There is that London plan,
he has influence. He can't tell them. He can't always tell them what to do.
He could say the mayor and the boroughs should.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
they will.
Thank you very much to all of you for your answers, and to all of you as well, and Nikki.
So, what I want just to finally say, that we've had an absolute huge wealth of information, exchange, and real experience coming to us. And I think, and we've got the transcript. This, by the way, this has been webcast. You can all watch it again if you want to.
Relive the experience.
I'm very aware of the stamina of the people in this room, and it's been really illuminating for us. And we will be putting it all into a report. And I would like to say to anyone, all of you, but also especially to our representatives of the forums, that if you look at, if you have any ideas that you think you should have put forward, information you wanted to put forward, recommendations particularly, we really want your recommendations, because all the way through you've been hinting at things, giving us recommendations, and not just at the end, and they've been captured. So I just want to say, thank you all very much. It's resonated a lot with me because I set out on my planning career as chair of planning to do a neighbourhood plan in my own ward in the days when Jeremy Corbyn influenced Harringay Council and set up a community development department, which gave me, as a ward councillor and chair of planning, a community development officer to work on my plan with all the local schools on our plan, and also a planner. So we had that resource. And those
were the happy days.
Those back then. But anyway, but we've had, and I'm very grateful too for Brian for coming along and, you know, being the borough in this audience. And I just want to say that it's very nice for me too, because this is my swan song in a way. It's my last meeting as chair of this planning committee. I'm handing over to, you'll see it's going to be to Andrew for the next year. So thank you all very much for your participation. And now I have to note the report. I have to note the discussion and say that we are going to have a report coming out of it, and that will be delegated to us two. Delegated, yes.
Delegate authority to the chair.
I've got to.
Yes, you have to read it.
Well, I'm delegating authority to Andrew, and then you've got to confer with me, Andrew. But we're, and we'll all, and you know, obviously we'll work together on this.
To agree
So,
with the outputs from the discussion as well.
I've got to agree the output from the discussion.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't usually say that. Anyway, agree. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
Well done, Vicky.
Get